Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. It's going to be episode 264 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on the 8th of October, 2023. This is the official podcast for the fan site AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg 2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So on today's show, we of course will cover the news, and then our main topic is going to be our final of our three shows covering the Legacy of Yangchen. So we'll be covering chapter 27 all the way up to the end of the book. So that will wrap up the coverage of the fourth novel. But let's jump into news. There has actually been some quite significant news, and obviously stuff that will be happening soon as well. So we have to start off with two kind of quite negative pieces of news. The first one, I'll actually start with the video game stuff. So there have been pretty big layoffs at Navigator Games, who are the developer on Avatar Generations. This happened back in August. I think the day it happened was August 21st, which, if you remember correctly, is actually the day they had their last live stream. So hours after that stream, pretty much most of the people on that stream were fired. I think it was maybe all of them. So what's happening with Avatar Generations is that the game has not been officially announced to be done or anything like that. They're continuing to go on. The game is still up. There have been some bug fix patches since then, but there's been no new content added to the game in that time, and the communication, which was previously quite good with the developers, has gone down to pretty much nothing, where literally they've more or less just announced those patches, what's going to be in those patches, which isn't all that much, and there's been nothing said about new content. So we're in a pretty bad situation if you're a fan of Avatar Generations, where it doesn't look like there's new content coming anytime soon. They're not communicating to say anything's coming soon, and because so much of the development team was laid off, I think people are estimating it's in around 80% of what the development studio was. So going from about 50 down to 10 people left on the game. And already, you would say, it wasn't exactly the most kind of free-flowing game in terms of how regular all of the content was. So it just kind of feels like the game is in a rough spot where we don't know where it actually is anymore. So what are your thoughts on this? The mobile game seemingly in some trouble.
Yeah, that's pretty sad when I was hearing about that. And I mean, just losing job already is pretty bad. But for people who are, into the game, like you've, always talked about the game a lot, and a bunch of other people seem to be really into it. That's just kind of sad to hear, considering that they had, what seemed like a interesting roadmap for content coming out. And, it seemed like we were actually getting things from it, even if you weren't interested in the game and you were just following it for, say, the art that they were developing for it, which, seemed pretty good. That was cool just to get to see their interpretations on different things, and, things that, aren't actually, that we don't have any other sort of media for around, even if it's not, everything's, perfectly in line with things. It's cool to see what they've come up with and how they've been implementing it. But yeah, I've been hearing for a while that the game has been a bit sort of bugged and stuff like that, and stuff needs to be updated. So it's sad to see that, as of now, who knows where it's going to land up, if, Navigator Games is going to continue support, if they're going to get more people, or if they're trying to sell the company somewhere, which is sometimes what happens with these things. So it's not a great position to be in if you're sort of following this game in any sort of detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it is stuff like, the Kyoshi update. That was definitely the best update that the game has ever had. Getting official designs for those characters, and the idea that we would have seen more and more of them as we went on. If the game, stops as is right now, even in the kind of leaked data mine stuff, the only stuff that's not really publicly out there is there's a really cool official piece of art of Father Glowworm that would be really unfortunate if not as many people got to see anymore. And that is a big thing as well, is that, the adaptation of the Kyoshi novels was something that brought attention to them. And there was obviously the potential for Yangchen. They had teased that at some point Roku content was going to come into the game. Korra content was coming. Even some of the original stories involving the new characters we might not get that stuff. But again, they seem to be just going along with the idea that they're doing what they can for now. It's not that there's nothing happening in the game, in that like they're doing repeat kind of stuff that they've already done before. Like it's just enough to keep the game kind of going. So I'm guessing they're just waiting to see what they can or can't do, and they'll do some sort of a announcement whenever they can. But they're losing players every week that goes by without it. The next piece of news is very, very similar to that, in that we obviously found out about the Navigator Games one a couple of weeks after the fact, whereas I think we caught this one basically the week it was happening, and that is that there have also been layoffs at Avatar Studios. Now, this has maybe not been as, super heavily kind of in the news, in that it seems like it's more, some people knew some of the people working at Avatar Studios and so followed them on social media. They were then posting on social media about the fact that they're having to look for a new job because of, and I quote, huge layoffs at Avatar Studios. Now, one of these people mentioned that none of the projects have been cancelled. It is literally just that a lot of the crew on Avatar Studios have been let go. And for some people, this has been very much a like Panic Station's reaction, like the sky is falling, Avatar Studios is done for, to the point where, like, on my video I did covering it, I was kind of surprised that I got so many responses from people being like, oh, finally someone who's having like a reasonable take on this and not acting like it's the end of the world. Because it doesn't seem to be the case that this is like Avatar specifically is in trouble. It's more of like this is representative of what's happening in all of these industries. So like gaming, TV shows. Now it's affecting animation because of stuff like the writer strikes, and just the entertainment industry in general, like streaming deals and stuff like that comes into play. It seems like all of that stuff is happening, and so I guess Avatar Studios, because it was announced with this giant, prospect of like 8 projects and we're going to have 3 every year type thing. The way I kind of view it is probably that like the crazy future of Avatar Studios maybe isn't as like huge as it once was, but I still feel pretty confident they're not just going to like cancel that first movie because they're so many years in. And because they sort of invested initially in Avatar, they're going to want to see how it does, because they're still looking for that franchise and they have some confidence in Avatar. It's just that we might be doing this kind of one project at a time rather than 2 or 3 projects at a time. That's at least my take on it right now, when we know not a ton about why these layoffs particularly happened rather than general stuff, and then especially when we know so little about Avatar Studios still in general. But what are your thoughts on these layoffs at Avatar Studio?
Yeah, that is definitely something I guess you could take note of. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, the whole entertainment industry in America is kind of like up in arms right now. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not an uncommon thing to see, swaths of studios and people to either leave on their own volition or being forced to leave. So it's kind of hard to place where this is in the sort of scheme of their general production. Whenever you hear something like huge, that never sounds good regardless. But it's not uncommon for projects to let people go, especially once they get to certain points of it. And as far as they've said, which, again, it's something that we wouldn't know until well after the fact regardless. This is just something that we happen to know about because, like you said, specific people are, putting feelers out there because they need work like everyone else. That, the projects are still going. I mean, I don't know. I think, like you said, it's probably, maybe they're trying to wait and see how things are actually going to pan out and, sort of the reception of things. But I mean, considering that they're still in the, as far as we can tell, like, pre-production, maybe production phases of things, certain jobs and certain positions are more needed, less needed as things go on. So it is curious to just hear about this, so far in advance, and definitely can see why, people would be sort of upset just because, if a huge chunk of people are going, it would lead you to believe, as opposed to what we're seeing with the, Navigator games, that, there's less people to work on the project, so obviously things are being scaled back, but we don't know, the extent of what part of the production is really being affected, because if it is just Avatar Studios, then, they're not the ones that are actually doing the animation, production itself. So there's that to consider as well. So no, maybe they're done with that sort of stage of things. Maybe they're going to bring people back later on. Who knows? And I think you mentioned before in one of your other things, how does this affect that sort of Avatar sort of development program that they were doing as well? So there's a lot of different angles that come around when talking about production and TV and how Paramount overall is working. And I even work for Paramount, so it's crazy how different things work in the end.
Yeah, it's just, I think a lot of it does come back to just Avatar Studios for most fans doesn't really mean anything right now, because it's so rare that anything comes out that directly references them. So the fact that like Avatar Academy was specifically highlighted on social media a couple of weeks ago, and now how does that play into things? Because those people for Avatar Academy were meant to start in November, but now there's been huge layoffs, and the whole idea was that the Avatar Academy people were meant to work alongside the, main staff at Avatar Studios, and you're kind of wondering like how much of that staff is kind of left at this point. We just don't know. And then, like you say, because we know there is a different animation studio, Flying Bark Animation, once they're done with like the character design work, kind of like background design, like most of the stuff you'd see in like the art books, once that stuff is done, most of it is on the animators doing the kind of rest of it with like supervision, I guess. But again, we also don't know too much about that either. And then because there is the complexity here of, well, apparently Avatar Studios is working on multiple projects, even though so many of them are just in a kind of rumored situation, but we know that is the plan for the studio. That's also very, very up in the air. We just have to wait and see what happens. It's unfortunate, but we don't have the information right now. So we go from that into some of the kind of comic news. And before we get to the New York Comic Con panel, I suppose we should cover the news that we have kind of in a way prior to that. So first of all, what was announced at San Diego Comic Con was the new Avatar comic, The Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. That has now gone up on listing. So we have the release date and the description for this book. So it's coming out May 14th, 2024. So, kind of notable there that it is like, 6 months, 6-7 months after Azula and the Spirit Temple. That is on the longer end of things between like books from the same creative team when it's part of a group of 3, we guess. The description reads, the Jasmine Dragon has become a fixture of social life in Ba Sing Se. When his tea supply suddenly and mysteriously dries up, Iroh goes in search of answers and finds himself captured by a familiar face, Bounty Hunter June. Iroh must confront a part of his past while June considers her future, but however things go, someone's got to free the tea. So, some interesting stuff here in that it obviously gives you a little bit of an idea about like kind of how June gets involved with Iroh. Iroh needs to get tea. That draws him out of Ba Sing Se, I guess, a little bit. That's how June gets him. But then, as we sort of maybe suspected to a certain degree, something about Iroh's past is going to come up here. June is considering her future as a bounty hunter now in her first appearance post-war. Very interesting to see how these two kind of interact kind of going forward. So what are your thoughts on what we now know about the bounty hunter and the tea brewer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not surprising what their, sort of the initial sort of pull of this actual story and how it goes, but it does sound curious, and I do like that we're going to get a little bit of, Iroh's backstory, even if it isn't sort of the full thing that we want to hear about, the Dragon of the West and how, sort of things develop over time. So I don't know. I think I'm glad that we're getting a little bit of it. And yeah, just seeing June in it is just, I don't know, that just makes it curious just to begin with, because it's not a character that, really had that much involvement in this series overall. So the fact that they're bringing her back, I don't know, it makes it, at least a little bit sort of intriguing, even if, it's definitely, like we've said before, not something that I would have, highlighted as something that we needed to know.
Mm-hmm. The other comic, the one that's coming out next, is Azula in the Spirit Temple. Obviously, October 31st / November 1st is the release date for this book, but we do have preview pages. Right now, it's just the initial, in this case, 8 preview pages that have gone up Edelweiss here. So what we have here is basically 2 groups of 4 kind of pages in a row. So one's from very early on in the book, not the very first couple of pages from the book, but close. And then we have 4 more pages from a little bit later on into the book, towards the very start of Azula's spirit visions. But very interesting, people finally getting a proper look inside this book, and there's been, of course, a lot of discussion. So the first group of pages cover the idea that it is the Fire Warriors attacking a place that Ty Lee and some guards are guarding. And so we do get a bit of a Ty Lee-Azula confrontation. We get to see some kind of action happen here, and Ty Lee kind of point out that I'm going to find you, as they're forced to run away, but leaving one of the Fire Warriors behind. That is Chio. So, the highlighting the idea of Azula leaving someone behind, and then afterwards we get the character Zirine, who we've met before, kind of complaining to Azula a bit about, she is one of us. Why are we not going back for her? We have to come up with a plan. But Azula being like, no. As part of this group, we're warriors. It's part of this ongoing war. She frames this as a war. And you can see the kind of conflict rising between the Fire Warriors, as we kind of knew was going to be the case from the RPG information, which is the most recent Azula information prior to. So what are your thoughts on these first couple of pages from the preview?
Yeah, this makes it seem pretty cool. I'm really curious to see how this develops further, and Azula's character, because just seeing her interact with I don't know, people her own age, or who technically would be considered her peers, I guess you could say, is always sort of intriguing to see how she's going to organize them, and how, I don't know, she's apparently leaving some of them behind. So it's definitely something to see, I guess, sort of the inner workings of this sort of, I guess, group that they've made, and how that sort of interacts with the current, I guess, state of affairs of the world.
Mm-hmm. Then we get the probably the most talked about page, the 5th page of the previews here, which is like Azula's, like, I think this is, if I remember correctly from the book, this is like the first, I think, spirit vision thing that she actually sees. So it's really meant to be particularly shocking. So she just looks out, she's on the beach, and she's looking at Iroh's there, Sozin's there, Azulan's there, Ursa and Ozai are there, an unscarred Zuko is there, and Ranjan is there instead of Chan, as many people have pointed out. And obviously the idea is that she's kind of being shown a vision of her ideal version of her family here, and it's purposefully meant to be like, wait, this isn't correct. And as we go on, she gets her mother talking about how proud she is of her, Iroh praising her for conquering Ba Sing Se, killing the Avatar, and so on. And then the person to kind of ruin all of this is kind of Mei and Ty Lee, kind of saying that, like, as if your mom would be proud of you. And they're like, this clearly isn't real. Like, I thought, didn't you tell us that your mother said you were a monster? And we see the kind of spirit kind of aspect come out, as it's pointed out to her that none of this actually happened. And we do then see her wake up in the spirit temple, and we see what's about to kind of happen here. So very interesting stuff. It was so interesting to see so many people talk about that 5th page. But what are your thoughts on the start of the vision?
Yeah, no, it makes sense why people would be talking about that, because that's definitely, it's so out of character from what we've seen of any of them, and especially Azula. Is just it's pretty shocking to see. Of course, pretty quickly you find out that it's not real. Of course, it's something that dealing with her way of reconciling with deals. So it's definitely going to be cool to see what this sort of leads into, especially since she sort of wakes up so quickly from this.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, there are more visions as things goes on, but we'll have to wait just a few more weeks to finally discuss this. Of course, on the podcast, we will be reviewing this pretty much as soon as possible. It might probably be the next podcast. We'll see about that in terms of scheduling, but we definitely will be reviewing this one as soon as possible. I've been eager to talk about it because like it's coming up to like 3-4 months ago I actually read the book, so really eager to actually talk about it for finally. But yeah, not too long to go there. And then that brings us into, we do have the details of the New York Comic Con Avatar panel, which is happening on Saturday, October 14th. So at this point, we're only 6 days away from this panel, and we have basically all the details we're going to have ahead of time. So the guests confirmed are FCE, Faith Erin Hicks, and James Mendez Hodez. So FCE from the novels, Faith Erin Hicks from the comics, and then James Mendez is one of the writers on the Avatar Legends RPG for Magpie Games. I assume our typical moderator, Cara O'Neill, is going to be there as well, but the description is exactly the same. Abrams, Dark Horse, Nickelodeon, Magpie are going to be there, and it's the typical description otherwise. Based on last year, we should be expecting news because they've done it for the last 3 or 4 big conventions in a row, and going into this one, the expectations are that basically it's going to be a bit of a problem if they don't announce the Korra comic that we've known about since San Diego Comic-Con last year. It was a kind of surprise to everyone that they didn't announce it at SDCC, and now it kind of feels like, where are Korra comics if they can't announce it here? When is it actually going to get announced? Otherwise, I think it's kind of difficult to predict that there's going to be too much news. Magpie could talk about the Spirit World book, but we don't know what really is happening there. The big thing probably is, will Abrams say anything? Typically at the conventions, they've basically had no news, but it's been a couple of months now since Legacy of Yangchen. We still have the weird situation where FCE has like 90% said he's not doing anymore, but here he is at the new panel. What's happening with the next book? It's going to be an interesting one. But Greg, what are your thoughts on the Comic-Con panel coming up next weekend?
Yeah, I don't know. These panels, I mean, usually there's at least a little bit of something that you can get from them if you're, into sort of the extra media for Avatar that they have been putting out. So, it's cool to go, and it's cool to sort of see, I guess, sort of, the people and their thoughts on their, sort of productions and how they've, developed them, and just sort of the reactions and everything like that. So it's definitely cool if you're able to get there in person. So it'd be interesting to see how it goes out. But in terms of like any of the new things that, they have potentially coming out, I really do hope that they announce, a good bit of them, since they have been sort of, I don't know, it feels like they've sort of been backburnered in terms of their announcements of things. So I don't know. I'm hoping that there's something that comes out of it that makes it sort of worthwhile. It's in a decent sized room, but it's not like an oversized room or anything like that where they need to like have registrations or anything like that. So it probably won't be too crazy overall.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, like, because we're still 2 years away from Avatar Studios, that probably not expecting any sort of big announcement from them until maybe like at earliest February next year. This kind of is like the last time kind of before that to really do anything big, and in a way it's the opportunity for the publishers to show that there is a bit of a plan to actually get us to Avatar Studios, which hasn't really felt like it's been in place up to now. Everything's been a little bit random with the comics the last few years after that decision that was made back in 2019, 2020 from Mike and Brian, that we're switching to sandbox style storytelling and we're not doing 3-parters anymore. So this is why there's a lot of pressure on that Korra comic announcement, because we actually don't know if it's a 3-part comic or it's 3 one-shots. There's still weird wording from everyone officially about that. It's like the Mako part of the 3 books I'm working on type thing. So everyone really is eager to see Korra actually get something this year in terms of major content. Because in general, Dark Horse, the only new content they've put out this year is the Free Comic Book Day book, which was, I think, probably the most forgettable it's ever been this year. No one I've seen talk about it, really. So there's a bit of pressure on this. Hopefully there's a decent coverage of this, and the news actually kind of gets out there. And I hope they do more, especially the novels. It would be really good if they could confirm, even if not super directly just say that there is another book coming, because going into 2024, where maybe we're also probably not expecting too much information, it would be nice to have another novel next year, because the years where we haven't had a novels, like the gap between Kyoshi and Yangchen, was kind of rough when it's not being filled in by the other publisher. We'll see what happens there, and we'll report on it. But yeah, that's New York Comic Con next time out. And then we have finally the pre-order went up for the soundtrack vinyl. So this is the only physical way to get the vinyl. It finally got announced by Jeremy Zuckerman. Links went up and everyone went to pre-order it. I believe at one point he posted something on Instagram. Again, he did that thing where it's only up for a little bit, but I think he said the first print run of this is 10,000. Though not much extra information beyond that, but we now know that it's going to be a 2 vinyl kind of set. The vinyls themselves will be this kind of like, I basically call it like ice colored blue, which is kind of cool. So it kind of fits the whole Boy in the Iceberg thing. It has the kind of spirity light blue glow to it. It's very fitting for book 1 Water. Of course, the cover design we've seen before from Brian, that's on the front as well. We don't know, there's no details about like what extra like text and stuff like that is included here, beyond like I suppose a track listing, but it is just going to be the physical way to get the full soundtrack here. November 17th, and the retail prices in or around 40 something, depending on where you order it from. So do you have any thoughts on this? The vinyl finally going up, a little late, but it finally went.
Yeah, I mean, I guess better late than never, and it seems like they put a good amount of effort into developing it, and it seems like they have a good amount out there. So if you're really interested in getting it, it seems like you'll have like a decent chance of actually getting it.
Mm-hmm. So there's that, and then last thing, and I hate that this is almost like a kind of throwaway thing at the end here, because we had a new Avatar video game come out, and it's just a moving on type situation. I played it. I actually streamed the whole game over the course of a few streams. I gave it a 5.5. That seems actually rather generous compared to other reviews that I've seen out there. But in general, like, no one's hyper praising this game. I think there's some cool elements to it, and that, like, the fact that it was more of a puzzle game. When it leaned into that, I thought the game was pretty good. I think it's kind of bad at actually telling the story of Avatar, and I'm kind of surprised at how kind of relatively small in scale it is, in terms of just how much content they do skip over. I think there's some cool presentation stuff in the game about like the 2 different types of cutscenes. They're kind of cool. The little use of the Order of the White Lotus stuff with our kind of new character, the director of the Bossing Say players, was kind of cool, but not a lot of it is like praise for like the gameplay necessarily, outside of some of the more complex puzzles. So yeah, not the game we were looking for. No idea how well it has done just yet, but obviously review score wise not doing super well. But what are your thoughts on what you've seen for Quest for Balance?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's too, it's not at sort of the idea that the fandom has for sort of the game and the franchise and what, it could potentially be, in comparison to other, AAA or I guess even AA games, or even some indie games, depending on, the ones that you're sort of looking at for comparison points. It definitely, it's cool that it's out there. It definitely, might work for maybe a younger audience, which, as we know, is who is, more so targeted to. Not that a younger audience shouldn't have decent games as well, of course, but it definitely seems that they had a scope in mind that was very, I guess you could say, below what many people considered would be, I guess, deemed necessary for Avatar. Because I watched the streams that you did for the game, and I saw pretty much all of them and the ending and stuff like that. So it definitely has, its sort of ups and downs and things that it sort of leans into that definitely seem like they, put the effort into some parts, and other parts they sort of let go. But I guess I could definitely see overall why people are, scoring it on the lower end of things, and how it actually turned out in the end. And I think it's similar to like what you've said before. It's just this is sort of maybe an initial sort of introduction to seeing how things might work for Avatar and how it works sort of game mechanics wise. Because this, like we've been saying, there's not, even though we're still talking about it all the time, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really up there in many people's sort of conscious minds and stuff like that. So until it really gets sort of back more of that sort of notoriety, there's only so much that can be produced for it where people see sort of the greater scheme on the return on their investments there. But it's definitely cool that it's out there. Some of it definitely looks sort of neat and definitely works for some people.
Yeah, and then on the kind of like ambition of like us wanting better Avatar games, like going back to the initial news topics of all the layoffs, like we talked about layoffs for like a mobile game company, but it's happening with the major developers as well. And that, like, was it last week or earlier this week, like Epic, Fortnite had like huge layoffs, and Fortnite is by all accounts is doing super well still. So if even like the kind of best stuff out there in the industry is struggling, you kind of get why, like you say, Avatar, which is still in a bit of a gap period right now, why they're not giving it the budget, the time, the effort to make a full-on game when it's not at its most popular right now. That's where again we need Avatar Studios to actually like deliver, make the franchise popular again. Then we'll maybe get the game that we really want, but it's a struggle, and we probably need to wait for things to kind of change and become better, because I think there is an element of this as well, of just like, I think also expectations from just gamers in general are a little bit out of hand, where like I think everyone expects every game to be wildly ambitious with a huge scope, when it is really not feasible for anything except like realistically a handful of developers and studios out there. And that's just the way the kind of industry seems to be at the moment. But we will move on. Like I said, we're the main things we're waiting for is just Azul and the Spirit Temple to actually come out, and then hopefully New York Comic Con actually delivers. Otherwise, not too much that we're kind of waiting for the rest of the year. It's just, will there be another Avatar Studios announcement at some point? Who knows? But we'll move into the main topic for the episode, and that's going to be our review for the final part of the Legacy of Yangchen. So we're starting from chapter 27, Bereavement, and going to the end of the book here. So where we left off, we had just very recently had the death of Yangchen's bison Nujian, and the rough idea that Kavik is going to have to basically kind of sacrifice something here. He's finally going to have to put himself on the line as part of some plan to make something happen here. He's the only member of the team who kind of hasn't quite put everything on the line just yet, and that's where we go into kind of this chapter. So what happens in chapter 27 is that we see, of course, a Yangchen kind of struggling to kind of just do the basics here, dealing with her grief over the loss of Nujian. And she's immediately heading into the big Zongdu meeting with Chai Si, like just before the world leaders are about to arrive. She nearly makes a big mistake early on here, nearly blows Kavik's cover, does catch it just before that. We then build to basically she has delivered this message from Jujinta. And what we see in this chapter is that her reaction to the message comes across as if this is terrible news, this is bad news. She already wasn't in a good position, but now it's worse. And Chai Si, of course, picks up on this, takes control of the situation, kind of ends the meeting, and brings Yangchen out to talk one-on-one with Yangchen. So this is the setup for chapter 29, basically. So this is more of a kind of setup, kind of transition chapter here. But the important thing to note with this one is the message from Jujinta arrives here. The other side of the plot is going to have to catch up to this. And so again, this is a story being told a little bit offset here. And I know that some people like have struggled with like the way some of this is done. But remember, Yangchen gets the message from Jujinta here. In a couple of chapters, we'll see Jujinta leave to deliver this message. But what are your thoughts on chapter 27?
Yeah, I mean, it's a like you said, it's a transition one, but it's it definitely it's setting up the stage of things, and I think, I definitely can understand where this part of the book, where it's going sort of back and forth, can be, I guess, a bit sort of disconcerting or discombobulating in terms of, what's happening when. But I think, like you said, if you can key into sort of the important parts that are sort of happening and how they sort of are acting in the moment, it sort of pulls itself together. I think for this part, it didn't bother me sort of as much because it's things happening pretty rapidly, and a lot of these chapters are pretty shorter, so it's sort of, goes here, goes there, goes back. But in this episode, or in this chapter, it's curious to see how Yang Chen is sort of reacting towards the events, because, part of it, later on is fine, is, part of it's sort of an act, and part of it's, really true, because, she really did just lose Ninjen, and, she's definitely feeling those effects, and, that's what Chai-Si is sort of keying in on here, or, what she thinks she's keying in on, although, I don't think she knows, sort of quite sort of the depth of, everything that Yang Chen is feeling here, but no, it's coming across more or less. And, I like the fact that they make note of how she sort of disposes of the node and the fire and everything, and how Chai-Si's seen that before, but that sort of is a shock to everyone else there. So, they're able to sort of, Yang Chen's able to sort of play it up in terms of how her emotions are feeling in this moment here. So it's I think it works as sort of the setup for this last sort of ploy and plan that she's going for.
Yeah, there are definitely like very, very strong writing parts of this chapter. Like even the very opening of the chapter, the idea of like before detachment, grind the flour, sweep the floor. After detachment, grind the flour, sweep the floor. Just getting across the idea that like the world doesn't stop, even though something really kind of tragic and kind of world ending almost has happened to you personally. And she is now going into like the most important kind of event of the book in the worst possible kind of state, basically. But yeah, like you later find out that she's not as broken as you maybe think, but until she gets the message, which is mostly kind of like positive news, but it's still she doesn't know until she actually gets that message exactly how much information she's going to receive. And in the grand scheme of things, what she actually gets is relatively subtle, but she knows she can use it to her advantage, but it's not like an instant win just yet. There's still a lot that can go wrong from here, even though she gets ultimately key information from Jujin. But we'll go into chapter 28, Extraction. So this is a Kavik-focused chapter. So at the start here, the plan is in motion. We don't know what the plan is just yet, but Kavik is waiting on the bench for Kalyan, and they do sort of set up the idea here. You're kind of meant to be led a little bit to believe, has Kavik gone rogue again? Has he betrayed the group for his brother a little bit because he's doing this and the others don't seem to be around him? I'm not sure how well that necessarily works, but they're just keeping that information from you right now. Eventually, Kalyan comes, sits down next to him, and basically, initially, Kavik confronts him over his brother's involvement in what happened on the island, that, like, you're okay with that? Like, you were involved in making and organizing that to happen? And Kalyan just says, like, I don't have to respond to any of that, but he actually does, so he kind of makes a mistake, gives up a little bit too much information, and just kind of goes along with the idea that, perhaps these people who you're upset on behalf of, maybe they were paid for what, they did. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't really resolve it that well. It's just Kalyan explaining away the actions of himself and Chai-Si. Then, he's just like very critical of his brother throughout all of this. This is where he brings up the idea. This is what the plan seems to be. We're going to burn you. We're going to basically give up what you're really about to Chai-Si. She will know that you betrayed her with unanimity, and we all know how Chai-Si treats traitors. So it's effectively, Kavik saying to his brother, I will give up information that will get you killed to him. And Kalyan tries to kind of argue around this a little bit, saying that, like, are you just doing this because you feel guilty to the Avatar and that you have to do this, or what's this really about? Would she even approve of this plan? I don't think so. But then the key point is, would you actually do it? Would you actually give me up and basically sign my death note effectively here? And they do the kind of look in the eye thing, so I can tell you're telling the truth. And Kavik is willing to do it, and he's shocked at this, but kind of realizes that he is just, for whatever reason, loyal to Yangchen through all of this. And so Kalyan, even though he's like, I wasn't expecting this, realizes that this isn't too bad actually, because he reveals he's actually already told Chai-Si that Kavik is his brother. So it's this kind of reveal that throughout the entire book, basically, Chai-Si has known this the entire time. So he's come clean about his betrayal from before. So the question obviously comes up, why are you not dead? Why has she forgiven you in particular? Why are you so special? And this is where the reveal comes out. Why wouldn't she show some leniency to the father of her child? So the reveal of who the father is Kalyan. Probably to be expected. I think there was not too many options here. I think most people were going for, it's either one of the combustion benders in an effort to have more combustion benders, but they're not going down that path of that's how combustion bending is passed on. Otherwise, this is probably the one that actually makes sense. But what are your thoughts on the first half of this chapter?
Yeah, I don't know, it's something to see them go sort of back and forth here, and the brothers and Kylan and Kavik's, there's sort of, dynamic that they've had and they've developed over the years, and how, even, more progression in this chapter, how it sort of, even gets more clear, how their dynamic really hasn't sort of changed over time. But, this is sort of what seems to be sort of their first part of their plan, and Kavik sort of, willing to give it up, but it not sort of, turning out in the way that he thought it would be, which is interesting considering that this is just sort of, part one of their overall plan. But it definitely seems like Kavik would have been, willing to do this, and it wouldn't have turned out pretty well, except for, Kalan, and just, again, he has that sort of special ability, it seems, to just sort of be one step ahead of the game in most instances here. So, his little brother just isn't quite up to date yet.
Mm-hmm. After this, the second part of this chapter is that Kalyan basically reveals to Kavik what his goal is, what he wants to achieve almost in life, and that is he wants his entire family to just live happily, peacefully, untouchable by the rest of the world, basically the other world leaders. That's Chai-Si's plan. That's kind of, I suppose, this is Kalyan's specific view on that. And that includes, obviously, himself, Chai-Si, their son, but Kalyan's family as well. He wants his parents there. He wants Kavik himself there. And it's just this very idealistic, almost very simple plan for someone who otherwise is this kind of mastermind leader of the Jandari Association. And Kavik literally calls his brother mad here for having this as his main goal, but it completely fits Kalyan's character, that pure almost obsession with family is kind of what he is about. So, of course, Kavik disagrees with this. He basically forces this to become a kidnapping, effectively. Tail shows up at this point, and yeah, they kind of just have to control him at this point to gain control of him. But this is when the Order of the White Lotus arrive, revealing that they've also started to do stuff, without telling Kavik. And so what's happening here is we have this setup for this brutal fight that's about to go down between the Jandari Association and the Order of the White Lotus group that's actually here. And in the middle of all of this is kind of Kalyan trying to protect Kavik, and Kavik trying to do whatever he can to get himself and Yangchen the advantage. So it's an interesting setup here, as they really set up the idea that this is a bloody battle that's about to take place here. But what are your thoughts on the last bit of this chapter?
Yeah, no, that's pretty. I mean, I don't know if it's cool, but it's intriguing to see that this, like they mentioned, is sort of like a double kidnapping situation that sets up here, because, the brother is trying to take the younger brother away from all of this issue, and, has sort of this, such a self-centeredness, such an ego on himself in terms of, what he thinks is right and how he's going to protect his family, even though, Kavik, immediately sort of calls him out on like, this isn't going to work. Like, why would I just forgive you, and then, not even thinking like, the parents and how they would react to this whole sort of situation. Like, it seems really sort of, high and mighty to think that you're going to be sort of this sort of untouchable in the world. Like, there's so many people, so many, things happening. Like, no one, even the Avatar, as you can see, is completely sort of untouchable by the powers that be. So I mean, Kylon mentions like he has faith in his woman and everything like that, but we can see how that doesn't necessarily turn out the best in the end here. But yeah, just sort of the setup for this, it really seems like one of those like old school sort of setups for like a street fight, gang fight between these two different groups here. And I guess it's not really a huge amount of people, but 7-on-7 or however many they say in the end, when you sort of line up all the people that sort of basically come out of the woodwork here in this sort of semi random location that's in the heart of the city, it's definitely sort of showing that things are really coming to pass at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm. Next chapter is chapter 29, The Pitch. So we cut back over to Yangchen here. So again, this is quite a bit before, like after what's happened in the previous chapter. So yeah, this is Yangchen and Chai-Si finally getting a chance to talk one-on-one. And basically over the course of this like 4 or 5 page chapter here, Chai-Si just reveals to Yangchen kind of what she wants from her. Like basically, if we do the whole thing of let Chai-Si win, which she said to a few characters at this point, what does that entail? And basically, what Chai-Si wants is to become the Zongdu of Jonduri, specifically for, forever. She wants that position to become lifetime and hereditary. So there's no time limit on it, and it will be passed on to her son, basically, in the future. That's all she wants. She specifically says she doesn't want the other Shang cities. She's not that, doesn't want that expansion. She thinks that's like too greedy. She's fine with just the city that she already controls, but having it be this permanent thing in official law. And what she wants from Yangchen is her full support when like they go back in to have the discussions. That if she gets the support of the Avatar on this, then the other Shang leaders will agree, and then basically the world leaders will also probably be more inclined as well. And you have to remember that over this whole thing is also still the whole idea that Chai-Si has her backup / main plan of, and if you don't do it, I'll use Thapa to kill the world leaders and effectively get what I want anyway, because to stabilize the world, we'll probably need to make these positions permanent in the first place. So that's the kind of whole plan that's actually happening here. And of course, Chai-Si thinks she has this won because Yangchen is in such a bad position, clearly grieving the loss of Nujian, feeling like she's failed and is a bad avatar. Chai-Si feels like she's in the full ascendancy here. And Yangchen, at the end of the chapter, just says, I think we can ultimately come to a solution. But we don't really see her say yes or no. But that is the plan coming out. So what are your thoughts on this chapter? Finally, we know what Chai-Si wants, and it's probably what we expected.
Yeah, you're right. It is along the lines of what we expected here. And, she's always mentioned, like, the whole idea of, being able to stay in power, how, the position seems like it's such a short time to be there and to really get things done. And then you're sort of out so quickly. Like they're always sort of mentioning, sort of the past Zongdus and where they've been or what they did sort of after their term, like how she, uses one of the houses, as sort of like a staging area of the past Zongdus and everything like that. So, she's been about sort of the legacy and her hair and sort of, how the future will sort of turn out. And, I don't know, it makes it, they try to make it seem like she has like, a decent perspective of things. Like she's not trying to sort of overreach her bounds, her means here. Like she just wants to rule one. But, they mentioned that, she clearly has all the other ones in her pocket, more or less. So, even if she isn't sort of the above board ruler of all of them, she really does sort of have, the underhanded means of controlling sort of all of them regardless of, what seems to be sort of on the surface. So, I mean, I don't know. It's definitely an intriguing way of thinking about how, she wants to rule things and how she hopes that having the Avatar support and or the blackmail support of the Avatar would really lead her towards this sort of endeavor. It almost makes me wonder, could the Avatar, along with the other Zongdus, really sort of, push this sort of, additional sort of ratification through to the other sort of world leaders? I mean, I don't know. I would think it would be a hard sell if they were to try to go sort of the above board way of making this sort of legal with the other sort of world leaders here. I don't know. I think she probably would have had to resort towards her other means, which I don't know. With all that sort of turmoil going on in the world, I don't know. That almost makes me think that maybe it might not have been, as easy a way to go about this. But no, it's definitely her plan, and she's definitely thought it out, and is trying to sort of play the Avatar as well as only she might be able to, in terms of making it seem like this is the best sort of solution that is available to Yang Chen at this time here, not knowing sort of all the other sort of things that are sort of happening in sort of the background here. So it's definitely sort of no, I guess not like a huge, sort of crazy reveal of what's sort of happening, but it's nice to sort of get this part at least sort of laid out and to see, how Chai Si really thinks, things are going to go her way.
Hmm. I particularly love just how kind of like reasonable in a way the kind of plan is. Like the way she lays it out to Yang Chen, especially right towards the end, is that like, is this really such a bad thing if you just actually like supported me? Like I'm the most stable leader in the world right now. We could work together and it would improve like what I'm doing, and it would improve what you're doing as well. Like she makes the point like effectively that your position, your legacy would be improved by assisting me because I'm such a stable entity in the world. I already have a certain amount of control over like other places as well. This is a win-win. But then it gets to the point of like what we kind of have to ignore if this is agreed to, which is the absolutely terrible things that Chai Si has like made happen on the island, like hundreds of people just dead in her quest to kind of get these benders with like rare powers. And that's kind of the big question here of like, this is a Yang Chen who you kind of think in a certain way like might be willing to do this just because of the emotional situation she's in. This is sort of a easy solution where no one has to die. But but to agree to this is to kind of like justify what happened on the island, and Chai Si isn't brought to justice in all of this. That's the real kind of debate. But we move on. Chapter 30, choosing sides. So we go back to Kavik and Kalyan. And obviously as the action is happening here, we really get described the idea that people are dying in the background like constantly throughout these scenes. Like we already got the description. Everyone is using like bladed weaponry and bending, so people are dying all over the place here. And Kalyan's just trying to kind of keep Kavik from kind of getting himself killed here in the middle of all of this. So like Tail is in the middle of these fights as well. They're going past like people falling down dead, people getting poisoned. There's a little bit of action that like Kalyan gets involved in as well. But Kalyan is forced to eventually chi block Kavik, which I think is like the only reveal of that in the entire book, that Kalyan actually chi blocks him here. But then we get the kind of bigger moment here, which is that Tail is facing off against Do, the other Order of the White Lotus member, and Tail kills Do. And with Do's final act, he kind of hits Kalyan on like the shoulder with a bit of a glancing blow. This allows Kavik to kind of run away. And it seems like this has kind of worked out. Kavik is getting away from Kalyan in all of this. He's going to make his way to safety. And out of nowhere, he just gets like stabbed in the side and kind of like goes down. And it's Jujinta saying that, like, I told you what I'd do if I caught you betraying the Avatar. And he just walks off. And so we're just left with this kind of shocking end to the chapter that you're like, wait, has Jujinta betrayed Kavik? But no, he's saying Kavik has betrayed the Avatar. Like, what's going on here? And you sort of know overall this isn't the story. I don't think this isn't what's actually happening. But we'll find out about this in a little bit. But yeah, pretty brutal chapter here with the description of the action and just people dying left and right. But certainly some interesting stuff here. I'm not sure how effective the kind of like tease of, because we don't have the full plan, it suggests stuff about what's happening with Kavik or Jujinta actually works. But I also don't know how much the book really leans into that much. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, no, that is something that sort of think about how, how much sort of the behind the scenes that you don't really understand that's going on works or doesn't work. I mean, I don't know. I guess when you think about it, he has mentioned that over and over again that, if you betray him, or betray the group, that this is what's going to end up to you. So, it's still, main character, or a main character at least, sort of getting, stabbed out of nowhere, still has, a bit of a shock value to it, even if, you don't think it's completely sort of, 100% there. They're still injured, as far as you know of, at this point in time to some degree. But the overall fight here definitely does come across as a pretty sort of brutal and sort of quiet endeavor, because they're, trying not to, bring attention to them, sort of between this whole sort of battle that they have here. But they're still, like you said, there's still pretty brutal. People are definitely being killed and, sort of poisoned, and, the sort of way to describe sort of the bending and the techniques that they're using, it seems like they're pretty, they're contained, but they're very sort of dangerous in what they're sort of doing here. So still pretty brutal. And I think, the book overall has gotten across that, bending can be used in these sort of, a lot more, I guess you could say, dangerous and, not sort of the technically the sort of, traditional sort of bending sort of visual way that we sort of see it in the series. These are a lot more sort of, targeted sort of strikes and blows compared to what we might see, or when they're using their, abilities in sort of the large scale sort of methods here. So we definitely see a lot of that. Even Kavik gets a little bit of that in there, where he's using sort of the spit and stuff to sort of target sort of his water bending that he has when he's, pretty sort of beat up at this point, after sort of the chi blocking here, which, it almost makes it seem like they sort of, they don't even mention it sort of like, I mean, I guess, it's not really sort of mentioned overall in sort of the direct terms of how it really sort of works and everything like that. But it's, it doesn't seem like it's sort of I guess you could say like the full force of the chi blocking here, because he is sort of able to bend and he is able to sort of, keep moving on. At least a little bit to some degree after he's been hit with all these sort of blows here. But it definitely seems pretty dangerous what's going on at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that little detail there. Yeah, Kavik using his spit to kind of fire like icicles into Tail's eye. That kind of is a bit of a setup for the start of the next chapter, chapter 31, where I think I even missed this going through in my videos, that basically, like, Tail, I believe here, is killed by Kalyan just because he's screaming because his eyes have just been hit by this attack by Kavik. And so that's the end of Tail here. Just like first like paragraph of the chapter, just Kalyan just takes him out for screaming too loudly. So yeah, what happens here at the start, Kalyan picks up the now wounded Kavik and is looking desperately for somewhere to try and kind of patch him up. Like, you can really see in the middle of this that, like, this is a situation like that his group has pretty much full control over, but he's really kind of getting lost in the middle of this fight here, just trying to protect his brother. And so he walks into this house and he's like, oh, this house is pretty big. Like, they must have some stuff where I can use to kind of patch him up. And he's kind of looking around, he's kind of speaking out loud to himself. I'll find bandages and clean water. And then out of nowhere, there's a voice and it's like, we've got plenty of both. And Akudan and Tayagum arrive. They've been in this house like the whole time, kind of waiting for this. And there's this confrontation here. And everything in the book prior to this would suggest that Kalyan should be able to defeat these two, because we've not really seen too much of these two in terms of fighting, whereas Kalyan has been portrayed as this near undefeatable waterbender. That's how skilled it's impossible to find him, and then when you do, he's so skilled. And this is what Kavik thinks in the house, is that these two are going to get themselves killed trying to take on his brother. But this is where we get the turnaround and the kind of realization of that. No, the reason in the Platinum Affair they were in such kind of important positions is because they were two of the best close-up fighters in the Water Tribe, protecting the Platinum. Of course they'd be able to fight really well in close quarters. So yeah, we get the situation here where Kalyan attacks them with water. Taegam dodges it and like literally sends the water flying away, in that he preferred to have like a physical fight with him, no bending. And he kind of like tackles him into the wall. Then, Akudan comes out, and Akudan is revealed now to be a waterbender, something we had not heard about at all before. And they do this really interesting kind of combination move where Akudan has kind of in the place of his missing arm, he has this kind of shield of ice. And so he wraps this around Kalyan. They suck all the water out, and it's revealed to be this kind of binding kind of situation. So they fully like encased him here. He cannot bend like whatsoever. And so in seconds, Kalyan has been captured by the other two members of Team Avatar, who we up to now haven't known all that much about. Then we get to obviously the interrogation, because this is kind of what we're about here. What can Kalyan tell them about Chai Si? Torturing him isn't working, getting nowhere, so they decide, oh, we'll torture Kavik instead. You clearly seem to care about him, so they try to make Kavik's wound worse, and almost immediately Kalyan kind of breaks and immediately starts kind of like arguing with them, and then revealing that he doesn't actually know all that much. And they eventually force him to say that all I do know, honestly, is the signal for Thapa to strike. I don't know where he is, but the signal is 3 gong strikes at the wrong hour. And they have to accept that, yep, I guess that is all that you actually know. And so Jujinta then pops up and is just like, yes, I will relay this information to Yangchen. And this is the message that she got a couple of chapters. So she actually has the information about the 3 gong strikes being what signals Thapa to attack. And we end the chapter with the idea of Akudan saying, I'm envious. Your brother chose you over the mission. I guess there really is no stronger bond than family. Referencing the whole idea that he is Chief Oiluk's cousin, and the reverse decision was made by his cousin, choosing basically the mission or the nation over saving a family member. So pretty interesting dynamics here. But what are your thoughts on this? The defeat of Kalyan, big moment for the husband duo here.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool to get to see them in sort of the spotlight for this part of the chapter in the book here. I mean, I don't know. I wonder how surprising, depending on how much you've been reading into the book and stuff, that they've been pretty sort of skilled, or they're this sort of skilled. I mean, the book has definitely made it out to seem like Kalyan is sort of like this, really sort of strong bender, or just really sort of devious. I don't know if you would consider him like really sort of strong, because we really haven't seen him have a lot of sort of like one-on-one confrontations when he didn't really already have sort of the advantage, other than sort of say his brother. But we're going to chalk that up to just sort of the skill gap and sort of the age gap there that they sort of been trying to reinforce on us throughout the whole sort of book here. So I don't know, but it definitely is cool to see how the book describes him as being sort of like so quicker than sort of anyone except for sort of the Avatar here. I mean, I don't know, Kavik seems like he's pretty sort of skilled as well, so I mean, I would consider him pretty up there. And I don't know how it would sort of fare if this was sort of a Unirac and sort of her sort of skills in comparison to the duo here. But it's definitely cool to see them get this sort of one up here, and they clearly were just very sort of planned and prepared for this sort of situation and this sort of eventuality here. So it's cool to see how well their plan worked and how quickly it was sort of set up in place here. But no, Kavik is definitely surprised here. He definitely didn't sort of expect this sort of, outcome to be here, even though, we know that this is sort of a whole thing sort of set up. So maybe it should have been expected to some degree that, they would have been well off in this situation. But Kavik's idea of, being able to sort of exploit his brother through him, works pretty quickly here. Like you said, he sort of crumbles pretty quickly once he sees or thinks that Kavik is in real sort of danger here from, the knife wound that he already has had here, and, gives up the information. I wonder if they could have tried to press it a little bit more, but it seems like Tayagum and Akudama are pretty well versed in this sort of, endeavor here. So they, pretty quickly realize as this is as much as they're going to sort of get in this sort of situation here, which, just leads you to sort of wonder sort of what sort of horrors they had to go through on their own, and in order to sort of understand this as well as they sort of mentioned later on with other people as well.
Yeah, because obviously they've been in the Earth King's prison because of the Platinum Affair. This is how, they're part of Team Yangchen, is that she got them out, and it wasn't their chief. That's the kind of whole point here. But yeah, it's that experience in these sort of interrogation situations. They know exactly how to act, and that's also, I suppose, a bit of a surprise for Kavik as well. But then we go to chapter 32, which is called Blinking First. And so this is the defeat of Chai-Si chapter here. This is where it happens. It's just this chapter. So a lot to go through with this one. So pretty much almost immediately here, Yang Chen decides, okay, I'm going to turn the tables on Chai-Si. In her head, she's thinking, Chai-Si is too confident. She's given herself way too much permission to just do as she pleases. So what she does is, they're obviously alone outside, kind of on a balcony. She basically takes the wall and kind of makes a kind of earth prison around them, and then activates the signal immediately. So she uses airbending to hit the gong 3 times. So Thapa is going to attack now, and they're both at risk. And she hasn't revealed everything to Chai-Si just yet, but Chai-Si knows that that is the signal, and is now panicking because she's basically trapped in a pretty much enclosed space with a combustion bending attack coming in from who knows what angle, because she knows where Thapa is, but we don't just yet. And so Chai-Si's last-ditch attempt to kind of save herself here is to try and basically highlight to Yang Chen, are you okay with doing this? Having this come down to this game of chicken effect. Think about what the world will lose. Think about your regrets if you let yourself die here just taking me out. And Yang Chen just laughs. And this is perfect writing at this point, because this has been the entire 2 books about Yang Chen and the ideas. She knows regrets more than anyone in the world, because she has her own. And she also has experienced the regrets of all the past avatars as well. And that's, in a way, what so many of the past avatars are defined by, is regret. So leaving some behind doesn't mean anything for Yang Chen. It is a truly laughable thing here. And Yang Chen basically defeats Chai-Si in this moment by just turning that around. What about your regrets? You would leave your full legacy behind. And so she goes through it the John Dory, your wealth, and then the second pretty much is she brings up your child, and the idea of but that should be fine because you have people working for you who are loyal to you, who will look after your child. And it's immediately, it's instantaneous. Chai-Si is just I give up, I'm done. And Yang Chen kind of pushes her to kind of say even more. She admits she's at fault and that she will do anything to fix this. And so Yang Chen just immediately leaps out of the prison, activates the Avatar state, and shifts the entire convocation hall around, basically to expose Thapa, who's actually hiding underneath everywhere. He's ready to fire, and Yang Chen is ready to face him. So for the second time in the book, we have this kind of cliffhanger ending to a chapter of Yang Chen facing an incoming combustion blast, and we don't really have the details yet on how she got out of it the first time, but she seems confident going into it here. what actually happened, and that's what the next chapter is there to explain. But most of the discussion here, I think, definitely has to be on what are your thoughts on the kind of defeat of Chai-Si in this moment? Like with Kalyan, it's basically family legacy being used against her by the heroes. A big switch up from what I suppose usually happens in most media, but this is an immediate defeat for her here.
Yeah, it definitely seems like she crumbles pretty quickly here, which, I mean, I guess considering what, the themes and everything that has been going on, the whole idea of legacy, it's what matters most to these characters and what's really, their weakest and, potentially their sort of strongest point. So that sort of idea, and she even sort of gave it away, herself when she, her whole idea of, for her locations to have her role of Zhongdu to be hereditary, to be something that lives on after her, to sort of teach her, son sort of how to do the things that she's sort of done, for good or for worse. And this is the point where Yang Chen really sort of sees things clearly. She's able to exploit it to her best ability here, and with the sort of impending threat that's coming, and the fact that Chai-Si, she's not a bender. She doesn't have any sort of strength, other than sort of what she sort of has been sort of able to sort of develop through her own sort of means. To sort of get out of this sort of situation here. And, sure, Yang Chen probably, doesn't want anything to happen. Maybe there could have been a longer sort of standoff here, but this is truly the point where Chai-Si, has everything to sort of lose at this point. And, yeah, she, has these sort of backup plans in place and people that could potentially take care of her sort of affairs. But, she sees herself as like the one all, the be all, and has she realizes that all the means that she's done for the thing that she's been going for, it's not like they've been sort of above board and people aren't doing these things out of those sort of magnanimous of their sort of hearts. She's been underhanded dealing and taking away all these people's sort of lives here. So she sees that things aren't really going to turn out the way that she really wants them to be, regardless of anything sort of happening here. So it's, she really doesn't have, any sort of alternatives to sort of come out of this on the best way.
And I do like the kind of nuance to this, the whole idea of that Yang Chen wins by just saying that, like, your son will be taken well care of by all the men and women, like, ... paid. And it's this interesting one about, like, okay, is this just that she doesn't trust the people she's paid, or is this her kind of, in a way, realizing, like, oh, the people I've paid and I treat terribly, and, all the implications about, like, she kind of does just use people and that's all that is, and so the idea that she actually really relies on them is not there. What are your thoughts on that, kind of like more specifically about kind of what the book is going for there with regards to what Yang Chen says to kind of win this kind of battle of wit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a key point there, because they've mentioned how sort of, behind the scenes, how under the board, how everyone's sort of looking at these different angles, how, people are reporting back to other people, and how they're sort of, who can you really sort of trust in these sort of situations? Like, that's sort of been like, the default point that they've made for Yang Chen throughout the whole book is that, she's, at her core, even though she's able to sort of be, this sort of, cool sort of avatar, sort of spy master, sort of, flipping and turning sort of people, which, in the end does sort of work out for her. Her core character is still really good, but, all these other characters, their core doesn't really seem that good, right? Like they don't seem like they have any sort of, true faith in the people around them to any sort of degree. I mean, she just sort of, flipped Iwashi and sort of took on all his debts just so that she could sort of control this sort of port from sort of backhanded means. So, where is the real sort of, loyalty among thieves? Is there any? No. As long as there's something to be gained, there's some sort of, understanding in what things are happening, but there doesn't really seem to really be any sort of truth to that in any sort of regard here. So I think, she realizes that her her power is only as good as she's able to be in sort of control of the situation. And if she's dead, where's her control really going to be at? Like, are people just going to sort of run off and just sort of do whatever, or is there going to be some sort of structure? Like, maybe she can have some sort of faith in the father of her child if he's in the sort of situation to sort of even be in that sort of position. But other than him, who else is there really that she can sort of rely on? And she knows the other world leaders are already sort of like gunning and sort of being reported on sort of her doings and stuff like that, right? Like, so there's no angle where she has 100% faith in anything that's sort of happening, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, like that's definitely it. Like, what I suppose she and Callion want is this kind of peaceful life away from pretty much everyone almost. But then it's like, yeah, you're leaving out any sort of support system really, apart from kind of controlling people through fear, kind of almost like Azula style. But uh, the next chapter is very important. So this was chapter 33, Appetite for Bitter. So we get a big flashback. This is probably the most effective kind of use of kind of telling the story out of order, because you can't have predicted this like at all. So we get before Taku, so before any of the stuff, like basically this is like before the halfway point in the book, before we ever arrived in this new Shang city, Yangchen travels to the Taihua mountain range, far away from the Northern Air Temple, and just outside a cave, she lands next to Ying Su, who is revealed to be alive. And, that means she's survived the incident from earlier on in the book. It's a massive reveal that, oh, we're going after Chai Si, who has a secret combustion bender that we don't know where she is, but this is the reveal that Yang Chen has had her own secret combustion bender for the entire book, and like even fewer people know about her secret combustion bender. So it's a super clever reveal, because it's, as we'll get to, like, it is perfectly set up here. So just, I suppose, initial reaction stuff, like how surprised were you when you got to this part of the book and saw that, oh wait, Ying Su's alive?
I don't know. I want to say, I'm trying to think back. I will say I probably was pretty surprised. Like, I don't think they did a pretty good job of, saying that they, both of them were pulled out of the area, which they talk even in this chapter, that they were both pulled out on the stretchers and it looked like they were sort of dead. I mean, I guess in sort of retrospect, it's not too sort of surprising that, one sort of would have survived and, would have both have been, turned to the other side. Especially since it seemed like, out of the two of them, Yingsu had, the most sort of interaction with Yang Chen and, sort of would have been, I guess sort of on the sort of, potential to be sort of good side of things out of, the three combustion sort of benders. But, they did sort of try to play it up like she was, no longer around anymore. So it definitely comes as, pretty much a shock, or a surprise in terms of her being, around still, I think.
So there's a few reveals that happen kind of back to back to back here. Yeah, one is that, yes, Ying Su's alive, but Zhao Yun is dead. So at this point, there are only two living combustion. Then there's an interesting thing. Yingsu asks about Ming Yer, who was obviously involved in the incident from earlier on in the book, like he was injured. But Yang Chen says, "Oh yeah, Ming Yer, he's like, I saved his life, but I ruptured his lungs and eardrums. I nearly killed him." And you're like, wait, what? I thought it was the combustion blast that did that. But then you remember, like, wait, Yang Chen was right next to it as well. Why wasn't she injured? What actually happened here? So this is where we get the idea that the combustion blast never happened, that Yang Chen kind of in the heat of the moment did this kind of invented a new technique. Basically, she created a void in space at the precise moment where a combustion blast typically goes off, and kind of neutralized it that way. It was so sudden, it obviously creates this kind of pressure imbalance, so it still has the sort of pressure effect of kind of collapsing someone's lungs. So she was the one who actually damaged Ming Yer, and so the void was small enough that it was only around Ming Yer, and that's why she wasn't hurt, and so on. But they describe that this is this kind of devastating kind of move here. This is the sucking air out of the room, but performed in a kind of specific kind of place in open air. So it's a very interesting concept, basically. They then explain that, like, okay, this is how we got out, this is how we faked your death, and so on, confirming Zhao Yun is dead as well. And then we get down to, like, okay, well, what's happening here? And Yangchen is just like, you can basically live discreetly and on your own, and it should be fine. Yingsu's kind of surprised that, wow, you're just going to let me go? And Yangchen is just like, yeah, so long as you keep your head down, because if anyone ever finds out you're a combustion bender, you're going to be hunted, but I assume, like, you'll know what to do. She suggests, like, oh, I'll send you back to your home Fire Island, but nope, the reveal is actually that Yingsu's from the Earth Kingdom, but has Fire Nation ancestry. And so she had good lungs because she was part of a village of mountain guides, and that's part of why she's particularly inclined to pass these tests. A little bit of backstory about how, like, her parents left to new parts, but they got caught up during the Platinum Affair, and so were kind of trapped where they ended up. And the idea is, it's the implication from there that I guess this is where the ship that brought a lot of people to the island came around, and this is where Yingsu kind of joined the program effectively. But it's at this point that we get to the kind of details of, okay, I need you to tell me how many other combustion benders there are. Now, we know the answer to this already because we've seen this stuff on the island, but this is Yingsu directly saying that, yeah, myself and the other two were the only ones that actually kind of finalized the technique. There were a few others that were in the earlier stages, but like no one like able to use the technique effectively. That's all she knows. And then it comes down to, like, okay, can you give me a rough idea of where the island was? I know you probably don't know exactly where it is, but Yingsu actually is like, no, because of my kind of mountaineering experience, I actually know exactly where it is. I can tell you precisely where it is. So we get this reveal that Yangchen knew going into Taku where the island was. So the whole plan to get the details from Iwashi, from his boat, didn't need to happen. But the reason why it does happen is that, oh yeah, it's a problem if you just come about this information for no reason. People will know it was leaked by an insider, and the only thing that makes sense is one of the combustion benders. So she has to basically pull a scam effectively on her own team. And this is this fake mission that we saw over the course of all those chapters in the middle of the book. And this is it. Yingsu and Yangchen had to come up with this mission here on the fly to come up with a valid reason for why they'd have the information about the island and kind of go from there. Then the final little detail here is that the final thing Yangchen wants from Yingsu is to train with her. She wants Yingsu to fire combustion blast at her so that she can actually turn her desperate act to save Mingyu into an actual technique that can directly defend against combustion bending. And so they have a bit of a back and forth about this, about how dangerous and crazy it is, but ultimately Yingsu kind of agrees, kind of noting that, like, yeah, you're going to need to step back a little bit because it'll only work if there's this much distance. And obviously throughout this, their dynamic is actually quite good. Like, you can tell there's a bit of a kind of friendship between the two of them, but Yingsu is a bit kind of surprised, I suppose, at the true character of Yangchen and what she's kind of plotting in all of this. It's pretty interesting. I know a lot of people speculate from this chapter about like how old is Yingsu meant to be. It's kind of hard to get an exact sense of that. But what are your thoughts on this chapter, the characterization of Yingsu here, and what Yangchen has planned?
Yeah, I wonder the ages there and stuff and how that sort of works out. I mean, it definitely seems like she's older, but how much more so is kind of hard to say because, they have the whole, the line about, being a horrible little girl and stuff at the end. So it makes it seem like she's a lot older than Yangchen. But I think, in general, we're just supposed to believe that our main sort of, Kavik and Yangchen are, generally younger than most of the people that they're interacting with, but not sort of so young, like, our original Avatar gang or anything like that, like maybe closer to core in their ages. But, the chapter overall I thought was pretty cool. It's cool to see sort of Yingsen's sort of personality, how it's, not sort of the what we're sort of stereotypically sort of trying to believe that most sort of combustion benders sort of end up being, which is sort of like so sort of stoic and like sort of very sort of few words type of things. So it's nice to see her have sort of a more personality here. Sort of even though she's sort of being led to sort of help the Avatar in this sort of way. There's some, like you said, there's some sort of camaraderie that they're having between the sort of two of them here. So I like seeing that sort of develop, and just the whole idea that Yang Chen knew a lot of what she what we thought she didn't know sort of already is cool to see how that sort of gets revealed here, gets sort of played out here, how they had sort of this fake mission just to sort of prove this information that she already sort of knew in this sort of situation. So no, I like that sort of how they're sort of going back and forth here and sort of developing this sort of information dump to us without making it seem so sort of boring or anything like that. So I thought this was a pretty good way, and I think like you mentioned before, this is a pretty effective way of sort of jumping back in time to something that we didn't even sort of see sort of happen at all. I like that sort of aspect of this part of the book and how it really sort of harkens back to sort of displaying all the information that we thought we knew but we didn't really know here, and leading them towards sort of her developing this sort of technique to sort of, as far as we know, sort of the only way to sort of, counter combustion bending. So to see that this is sort of where the development of that really sort of happened, I think is cool to understand here. And, I think it's cool that they mentioned sort of the distance and the length of where they're sort of initially sort of, going to sort of, I guess, practice sort of the way to sort of counter this technique, as opposed to like the sort of length of the Agni Kai sort of arena, and then when they mention later on sort of the length of an airbending sort of arena. So they make good use of that to give us sort of a, I guess, at least a little bit of an idea of how much distance that she has in order to sort of develop this technique and to make it sort of effective, and how later on when they mention how she pushed it further and further to make it sort of faster and faster, how that gives us a good visual for how this actually is working.
Mm-hmm. I think my only question coming out of this is that because we don't get like too many scenes with Yingsu, I'm surprised the brainwashing kind of is never brought up here at all, and it kind of maybe speaks to the idea of like, did the combustion benders even know they've been brainwashed? Because this will maybe inform a little bit of like Yang Chen's kind of reactions then when they find it, when they go to the island, that she knew what this was more specifically, whereas when you get there it's very unclear about what they actually make of that place. And then it kind of feels like still like an open plot thread that like Yingsu is technically still like, all Chai-Si has to do is say something to her and she's under her control, as far as we're aware, because she said like the brainwashing doesn't work as well on Yingsu, but she didn't say it like doesn't work, just that it's not as effective on her. So I don't really know what to make of that. Like I said earlier in one of the previous reviews, I do think the brainwashing is a little bit of a kind of thrown in plot point that I don't think was fleshed out in the way they probably needed it to be. But do you have any thoughts on that? The fact that they don't really bring up brainwashing when it comes to Yingsu at all?
Yeah, I don't know. I really wonder. I mean, I don't think that the characters themselves would really be as aware of, what's sort of happening to them in terms of the brainwashing. Like, that seems kind of ineffective to me if they know that they're brainwashed until you're ready to sort of really, make it known that you have like complete control over the character and you want them to sort of do what you want to do, but you don't want to force their hand. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if Yingsu isn't quite as aware of, that sort of fact of her training. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Dappa knew about it, just because it seems like they're sort of, showing that, he's under control and completely in this point, and regardless of anything happening, he's going to be, not of his own free will at this point here. So I don't know. I'm not sure how much I really would think that, Yang Chen was really sort of aware, what all of those sort of mechanisms were actually for about. I don't know. That doesn't seem like something that she would be as aware. It was more of a reaction to sort of the situation and the sort of, apparatus in general in the chair, as opposed to the actual sort of mechanics of what was actually happening down there. I mean, I don't know. Maybe she has. Maybe it's a past lives things where, one of them might be aware of it. So I could see maybe that sort of playing into Yang Chen's sort of overall knowledge of the situation, but they didn't really make that part sort of clear. So I don't know. I would probably lean on the side of her being unaware of the situation, and that being, like you said, one of the more sort of open sort of plot threads here. And I don't know, that would be interesting if they ever sort of interacted in the future, say when, Yang Chen is following up with Chai Si, if Yingsen was with her, would she try to flip that switch to sort of gain control of her in the situation? I don't know. That would be interesting to see if that were to ever sort of happen in the future. But yeah, that is definitely something that is a bit open.
Mm-hmm. Next is chapter 34, The Burial. And this is the action. So we now know what Yang Chen is capable of doing. Straight away at the start, we get the confirmation she's not in the avatar state anymore, so they're not trying to put the cycle at risk here. And she just makes the vacuum. She puts her hands to the sides, makes a kind of suction kind of motion, creates a vacuum, and Thoppa's blast comes in. It's basically, goes out basically in the middle of the vacuum, the void that she has created. And it's this weird situation where this is the big battle between effectively the two most powerful benders in the world at this point. And some dust has moved is about the only effect that anyone has actually seen here, because Yang Chen's technique is invisible. And I suppose you see a little bit of the trail initially of combustion bending, but Yang Chen made it go out before it did anything. And so it's just the strain on both parts, even though nothing actually happens in the middle. It's just this negation. It's a kind of funny dynamic, and they really highlight that idea that it's Thoppa is putting out this very positive. He's just putting pure energy out there with his attack, whereas Yang Chen's counter attack is just pure kind of negativity. It's pure void. And just the complete contrast here. This is where we get more of the whole idea. One of the few references to brainwashing in the entire book is that when she first saw him, when she moved the ground, she noticed the vacant expression. When Thoppa then goes to combustion bend for the second time, it is noted that the blankness that seemed to encase Thoppa sloughed away from his eyes and shoulders. So the energy of trying to perform the technique twice in quick succession kind of breaks the brainwashing. But it's very unclear if Yang Chen particularly makes any real note about why he is blank versus why he looks different now. But it seems like he has a little bit of a where am I? And then, oh, I'm in the middle of a fight. Fires again. This is where we get the explanation that Yang Chen had prepared for this. This is not just a one and done thing. She prepared with Ying Su, who could combustion bend much faster than the others, and was fully prepared for a second blast. And that's exactly what she does here. She once again voids out the attack. And the problem that happens then is that Thoppa goes for a third one in a row. And this is particularly extreme because we know he is the kind of slowest to do attacks. And he's trying to do now a second in a row, after the first one, with no build-up whatsoever. She knows what happens when you don't do it properly from what happened with Raite. And she can tell, because his nose is bleeding at this point, she can tell this is not a right thing to do. And so, they just described the idea of his chest caves in, but it kind of caves in to the side. So he kind of goes sideways. He doesn't do the technique correct at all, and we get the sort of misfire combustion bending thing happened to Combustion Man. All the little pops start to go off, and Yang Chen is just okay, he's gone. All I can do is basically kind of protect the surrounding area, and this is why the title is called The Burial. She just smashes her foot into the ground and just sends him plummeting through the earth to kind of make the explosion happen underneath, and he just like explodes himself basically under the ground. And all anyone sees is just a bunch of earth kind of raining down from the sky as Yang Chen walks off to go to sleep, basically. But notably, she does walk past Earth King Fei Shan as well, but she doesn't have it in her to deal with him right now. But that is the defeat of the villains here across those last couple of chapters. I love the whole idea of this really powerful battle that just nothing really happened, and then one of them just exploded. Like the actual battle that they had was literally two nothings, even though it was two powerful techniques kind of negating each other. And then Yang Chen just like earth bends him into oblivion and he explodes. It's I'd love to see visuals on this because it just sounds so kind of crazy to have actually watched. And obviously it helps as well with the idea that most people watching would have no clue at all what's happening because they don't know what combustion bending is. They just see two straining benders like looking at each. But what are your thoughts on the battle here?
Yeah, it's something to see that is like, such a huge event, like you're saying, but it really, there's nothing really, no, I guess you could say like spectacular visually to actually see it, which, kind of makes it more intriguing in a way because it's like, it's like a battle of wills. It's almost like in the other book with Kyoshi where there's sort of, the earthbenders are sort of fighting against each other with their sort of, earthbending skills, and they're trying to move the little rock in between, but, it's just them sort of exerting, so much force on one particular point, but nothing's really happening because they're, somewhat evenly matched at that point there. So it's like, this is nothing and everything that's happening at the same time, which, I guess, it just goes in line with the whole idea of her sort of technique being like pure, negative Jin and sort of, devoid and creating that sort of, lack of space to sort of, blow out this huge sort of, energy blast that, otherwise would, destroy the area in like a matter of moments, right? Like, once it's sort of charged up after the pop, 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 it pretty much, decimates everything in sort of the area at that point. So, it definitely is something to sort of, grasp the concept of, nothingness and the whole sort of void. I mean, I think, these last couple chapters make a good, sort of showing of, Yang Chen's sort of thoughts on this process, her sort of internal dialogue, how, how fast she has to sort of react this time, how this is sort of like potentially like her upper limits of her sort of abilities as an avatar. Like she can only sort of go downhill from this point here, which, makes me, sort of wonder, is this sort of like her peak in terms of her avatarhood? Like, is this like the strongest that she's ever going to get at this point? Because she still seems, fairly young, at least as far as we can tell from everyone's sort of, reaction to her. So, I would think that she would have at least a couple more years to sort of, get up in her sort of abilities in terms of her peak performance. But, maybe this is really it for her. Maybe this is, at this point, in terms of, their lifespans and their sort of expectancy, everything's sort of downhill here. But, it definitely seems like this is, the high octane point energy, her being able to control this sort of void energy. I mean, it's definitely seems like this is sort of the peak of sort of, I guess her technique, her teachings, how they even mentioned earlier how like when she was flown up in the air, like she felt like this was really like the highest, point of her understanding sort of the avatarness, or, just airbending in general, like how she was like pretty weightlessness up in the air and, maybe could have, completed the technique for a true sort of flight at that point. But, she had to sort of come back down to earth and sort of ground herself in this sort of, technique, just sort of shows her capacity here. And, she even sort of uses, earthbending to sort of, completely sort of snuff out this sort of, technique here, which is also, negative Jing in that sort of regard. So they're able to sort of completely negate the effects, not completely, because we do see sort of the rain of debris as she sort of, tries to get sort of a bit of a respite at the end here, completely sort of contains this event to this localized area. Now, she still sort of still did sort of like raise the building and use a tectonic sort of, localized event to sort of move everything around. So it's not like everything's sort of completely, unopposed to see what's sort of happening here. But, visually between the two benders, you can't really tell sort of what happens. So it's a spectacular event that sort of no one will really truly understand. Even if you sort of explain it, it's sort of hard to grasp. I think, probably the only person that will really sort of understand it to some degree later on, of course, is King Fei Shan, who she just sort of passed here.
Mm-hmm. And what I do like about this is that right at the end, she does kind of effectively, what to say, like she does a funeral benediction for Thapa, that she didn't want to kill Thapa unless she absolutely had to, but because he went for the third blast and was going to explode, this is what she had to do. But it speaks to the idea of, like, for anyone like debating like the power of an avatar versus one of these more powerful benders of one of these special techniques, the earth bending that she does there highlights that, like, any debate over like, oh, can a combustion bender defeat an avatar? Well, you get your answer here. Is that, like, if she really wanted to, she could have just come into this battle, like, landed, and literally just taken the ground out from underneath him and won that way. That she probably still would have had to have dodged the first explosion, but I think she could do that. And then once she starts to do any sort of an attack, if she goes for it enough, the implication is that because she's a fully realized avatar, she has the power to take him out. That he can't typically fire quick enough to actually do anything. That, in a way, the void technique works here is because she also wants to hide the nature of his technique from everyone around her as well. But it's still really impressive because, they describe the whole idea of like the whole void technique. It's like the strength to keep air away from a space. That's why this is such a tricky and powerful technique, is that you're not flowing the air like you typically expect to. It's like you're keeping it from flowing in and doing it so suddenly. It's one of the most powerful abilities out there because she uses it to block combustion bending, but if you just do this to someone, like what happened to Ming Yer, it's an instant like win attack if she actually targeted someone with this. Like if she's close enough to actually void the space around someone, she just immediately wins, because unlike the suck air out of the room technique, this is so sudden. It's like a pressure decompression thing, and it just kind of is like, oh, I think a lot of people who are more into the fantasy fight kind of power scaling stuff are just like, oh, Yangchen goes like way up the rankings just because she can do this. And it's one of those kind of instant win attacks. But we move on to chapter 35, which is called Truth. So we're back with Kavik here, and Kalyan and everyone else. And Kavik quickly brings the kind of act to an end. He reveals, yes, I was stabbed, but Jujinta did the stabbing so carefully that it was such a minor wound. It was just one enough to make me kind of bleed, that it looks bad, but most of the blood that Kalyan saw was actually blood lacquer that they had set up from before. And, this was just completely part of the plan. Kavik, all for fully being used against his brother and using his care for, Kalyan's care for Kavik against Kalyan. So they do describe this as like, this is kind of the first time Kavik has ever got a win over his brother. He doesn't like that it's kind of in such a crazy situation, but finally he has actually done it, and he feels ultimately that, like, yeah, I would make the same choice again if I absolutely had to. So any sense of kind of conflicting loyalties at this point for Kavik is kind of over. He is fully committed to Yangchen over his brother. We've gotten past the issue of the first betrayal at this point. We then cut back to yesterday. What was the plan to set all of this actually up? So of course, as we know, they had the team meeting. Yangchen wanted ideas. None of the obvious stuff of like, what if we just delayed the world leaders from arriving was going to work. So this is where Kavik steps up and realizes this is the sacrifice play I'm going to have to make. My brother is Chaisi's right hand. We attack her through him, and we go after him through me. That is the core of the plan. If they can't immediately target Chaisi, they'll get information from Kavik's brother, and use that against her, which is exactly how it works out. Kavik will burn Kalyan, and this is where Yang Chen kind of takes him aside and is like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you basically betrayed me over your brother before. What's going on here? Is this weird sense of like guilt that you have towards me because you betrayed me the first time? Or do you actually kind of want to do this now? Because I don't want you doing this for kind of like the wrong reasons. Not to mention, this is a pretty dark plan here in terms of the kind of torture you're effectively putting yourself and your brother through. I don't know if I super want to be involved in that. All of these topics kind of come up in this, but this is the point in the book where we finally get the Kavik saying to Yang Chen, trust me like you did with the Awashi thing, the fake plan, basically. I need you to trust me in this situation. And Yang Chen kind of doesn't really have another choice and reluctantly agrees to it. And there's a little bit of a joke between the two of them of just like, yeah, you'll probably be tainted if you follow along with my plan, but you'd only have to like atone for it by spending the rest of your life working to bring balance to the four nations. Might even have to do it after you die, just referencing that, like, yep, she's the Avatar, that's the default situation anyway. And so their typical dynamic has kind of returned, and that's how it actually came about. There's a little bit more left, but we'll get to that in a second. But what are your thoughts on the opening of this chapter, the act coming to an end, and then finally catching us up on what the plan was in the first place?
Yeah, I like the sort of reveal of what the plan actually was, how they have a bit of back and forth here in order to develop it, because this is pretty much a really going back in time to when this first started. This was sort of a low point after New Gen, and they really didn't have a lot of sort of options in terms of what they're going for. Like pretty much all the ideas that are thrown out initially are accepted as something that could be sort of used, but Kavik it seems he still has the idea of having faith in the Avatar and Yang Chen in terms of developing sort of the better outcome here. And even though Yang Chen can't really sort of trust the situation, like, is this, like you said, sort of out of duty, or is this sort of like a White Lotus sort of ploy here, which as of now I don't think that the the other team members are sort of fully in the loop on that sort of situation. There's a lot of different angles here, and Yang Chen really, like I said, she can't tell if he's telling the truth. She doesn't really have a lot of options here, so it's really a low point that was already sort of pretty low to sort of begin here. But it seems like this is after she able to sort of come to grips with this, even though they mentioned that he tries to sort of like sugarcoat sort of the true sort of plan that he sort of has as sort of the backup, because just sort of saying that they're going to sort of burn Kylon might not work. So even that sort of plan needs sort of a backup. So they have sort of backups on backups here.
Mm-hmm. And then the very end of this chapter is just back in the present day. Jujinta comes back to the house where, of course, they have Kalyan captive. And they're like, oh, yeah, we have stopped pretending at this point. Like, Jujinta was part of the plan, 100%. And at this point, they're just waiting to see what happens. What is the result of this situation between Yang Chen and Chai Si, Yang Chen and Thapa? Because they don't know exactly how this is all going to play out. So they wait, they hear the rings of the gong, and then they're like, the countdown, basically. That means Thapa's going to strike, so next couple of minutes decide the fate of everything. And so they get up to 300, so like a couple of minutes, and they're like, oh, I think that means we just won, because I think we would have heard something a lot quicker if things went the other way. And then we get what we've been waiting for quite a while. It's just everyone's kind of hugging at this point. The team is united, and Kavik is like, so are we square now? And Taigum and Akudan kind of mess up his hair, and it's like, yeah, basically it is. He just says, I hate you all, but they're all laughing together, even Jujinta. So fun moment as he's kind of fixed things with the rest of the team here with a plan well kind of orchestrated. But your thoughts on this final little scene here on this chapter?
Yeah, that was definitely a nice moment there of sort of the tension of the situation, and then sort of the sort of assumed sort of good resolution of things where, you didn't hear the huge explosion that they all knew that that's what they were sort of listening for. So I thought that was a good way of doing it, of sort of, counting down the seconds of 100, 200, 300, and then sort of, assuming sort of the best sort of outcome here, and them sort of, sort of being square, and, Kavik sort of balancing his books, so to say, in terms of everything that he's done in the past.
Mm-hmm. Second last chapter is chapter 36, The Path Forward. So we're in kind of wrap-up mode in the book here, so we get the Feishan wrap-up here. So it's Yangchen and Feishan, they're dressed up as sailors, they're on a ship. This is how they're having their secret discussion this time out. Feishan is, of course, furious because he witnessed, this fight. He doesn't know the exact details of what's going on, but he knows Yangchen has lied to him. So that's what this is all about here, is that we had a similar scene at the end of the first book where it was like, okay, things are going fine, but there was this implication right at the end where, like, if you go against me, I will kind of, in a way, bring ruin to the four nations. And so that's what it's kind of she's trying to avoid in all of this. So she basically brings him up to speed on everything that's happened. About the combustion benders, a lot of the situation. The reveal does come out that she has let Chai-Si get away. So Chai-Si is kind of just on the run, and this was something she purposefully let happen. We'll get the explanation on this kind of more later on. She then attempts to kind of diffuse the tension building between the different nations, asking him to remove his 20 divisions of troops so that a war doesn't break out. She also adds that she would like to become the Zongdu of all four Shang cities, as this would help to stabilize the world and solve a lot of the issues that basically have been caused by them being separate and the greed of the Zongdus that I've seen. Feishan is like kind of stunned at this. He can't believe that like this is seemingly the way things are going to go. Is Yangchen just going to get everything that she wants? He decides that, oh no, now I'm finally going to basically take my revenge on the other nations. Do what I probably should have done in the past. Like he basically is acting like the whole Platinum affair and the way that panned out was too fair of a result. I'm actually going to like obliterate the world here, go to war. I'll send my divisions after the different nations. What do you have to say about that, Avatar, basically? But Yangchen counters with the idea of like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. And he's like, why? Because you'll reveal the details of the weapon, like combustion bending, to the other nations. But she says, no, I'll give them the weapon to counter you. And this is when she signals Yingsu to attack. Yingsu's on a boat nearby. She combustion bends right next to the boat. Of course, Feishan is terrified at this because this is his first time properly seeing combustion bending up close. And this is what he would be up against. And he basically is forced into a situation where he has to agree to what Yangchen says. He can't go to war for fear of the reprisal from Yangchen's secret combustion bender here. And so she's basically going to get everything that she asked for and has neutralized Feishan in all of it. And the significant thing for her character being that she's kind of finally accepted using the tactics that some of her enemies throughout the books have used, which is that she's often been criticized for being almost like too logical, trying to resolve things too perfectly, when if she was just a little bit more bold and aggressive with what she plans to do, she'd probably get more of what she wants. And that's what she's doing here. She is effectively doing what Chai-Si is doing, of like using the threat of a combustion bender against others, but in the right way this time, because there's a sort of trust that the Avatar won't misuse the combustion benders. So that's the interesting point here. But what are your thoughts on chapter 36 here?
Yeah, I guess the whole idea from her perspective is that, the Avatar and her person is the sort of perfect neutrality in this sort of situation. So she, or her and the people around her, can be sort of trusted to not take advantage of, these cities that have been, in control of the trade during the Platinum affair, and this sort of, extra sort of power that can sort of tip the tides of battle between the sort of nations here. So, it is, underhanded, but, it sort of fits what, the book has been talking about this whole time, and sort of what, like you said, what, she might potentially should be doing in order to sort of to get the best results, because the world isn't as perfect as she would hope, or she, likes to believe it could actually be. Like, people aren't going to sort of do things out of sort of the greatness of their heart in most of these situations here. There has to be some sort of, reason, some sort of external force in order for them to sort of get on the sort of right track, and that this could potentially be, the right way to lay down the legacy of things that happen in the future, because, she will sort of eventually give up these sort of powers and these sort of, situations in these sort of cities here, which, we know from future things that, this does get resolved in some sort of form or fashion, because we don't hear about these cities later on. At least that's what we're going off right now. So, it's definitely, her, it seems like her sort of best way to sort of get what she sort of wants here. And it really isn't sort of a perfect situation, as she knows. It's really sort of just, breaking even in the situation, because, they're still going to connive and do things behind her back, and she'll have to keep track of things. But, at least at this point, other people will be working against each other, not necessarily directly against her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that's the big kind of takeaway from all of this, is just that she's being much more kind of, she already was proactive, but like kind of doubly so, like aggressively kind of proactive here, really forcing the hand of the people to not do what she doesn't want them to do, which she kind of hadn't done before. She'd almost been like too fair, and other characters being manipulative have typically been able to get the edge because she is always viewed as being overly neutral, overly fair, want the peaceful solution. But now she's willing to kind of step a little bit into the kind of shadows and be like, okay, yeah, I'll use the combustion bender to my advantage here to get what I want. And it's kind of fitting that she's finally just accepted that that's what needs to be done. That leaves us with just one chapter to go, chapter 37, Respite. So, we start off here with Yangchen basically explaining to Ayunarak, again, the situation that she has let Chai-Si go. Ayunarak is able to figure out that, wait, you've actually turned Chai-Si into an asset. You've, like, forced her to, like, work for you, basically. You can find her wherever she is and get information that she has whenever. You're going to use her. Ayunarak's borderline, like, jealous of, like, how well Yangchen has managed to kind of like come out of all of this with. Like, she has the combustion bending asset. Chai-Si is also an asset. Ayunarak reluctantly sort of like accepts defeat in a way in all of this. Like, she kind of has not the Order of the White Lotus have lost this in all regards, and even the whole idea of like just the, without it even really being addressed all that much, it's the idea that, oh yeah, and Kavik isn't part of the organization anymore either. We know he's with you as well. So that's certainly an interesting one, giving Yangchen the like complete victory over the Order of the White Lotus here, and addressing the whole idea of, okay, this is what's happened to Chai-Si. They have let her get her son, and basically allowed Kalyan as well to go with them. They're going to be on the run from Feishan. This is how they're going to distract everyone. So Feishan doesn't plan anything himself. They'll have Feishan want to get his revenge against Chai-Si. So Chai-Si won't be able to act because she'll always be on the run. And Feishan won't be able to act because he'll always be pursuing Chai-Si. And this is the solution to allow Yangchen space to basically bring balance to the world while her main enemies are working against each other. She's created time and space for herself with this actions. But, as Ayunarak said, the implication is that she can meet up with Chai-Si when needed to get key information. Now, there's a lot of stuff here that's a little bit like unclear about, like, it's actually very unclear what exactly the Chai-Si and Kalyan relationship really is. Like, are they properly in a relationship, or is the kind of their positions more of what was the thing there? But they are a family unit at this point and are going to have to rely on each other. So what are your thoughts on some of this stuff at the very start of it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one way to sort of resolve things, and it definitely, keeps things sort of in check, I think you could say. Interact definitely, doesn't get anything that she wanted for the White Lotus or her personally in terms of, being able to control, assets or the flow of information is all in sort of Yang Chen's hands here, which, I think, the book is trying to lead us to believe that that's probably like the best case scenario here. Like, the White Lotus was pretty much, willing to just let everyone go at war for them to sort of keep the asset on their own hands here. So this definitely seems like it's, a better option compared to sort of, other alternatives here. Fei Shan, trying to either get Chai-Si for revenge or just to learn the technique because, it seems like he was already sort of interested in the how of this. And it definitely seems from how they portrayed him that he wouldn't be above, trying to sort of develop this technique or understand it in some regard here, despite, seeing how destructive it is firsthand. So it definitely seems like Chai-Si, Kion, and, Kavik's nephew are going to be sort of on the run here, I guess, for the foreseeable future here, which, Yang Chen did mention that that's sort of just basically how, airbenders sort of live here. So it's, sort of a matter of perspective here, although, as we understand, Chai-Si definitely didn't want to be all over the place. She wanted to just be in one place. So, just deserves and all that sort of stuff here. So it's definitely, one way to sort of bring a wrap towards, this side of the plot without, completely resolving it because there still is stuff going on here. And, it makes me wonder, is the White Lotus is also going to be on this sort of trail here to sort of, find Chai-Si so that they can get this power or they can learn how this power was actually created? Because, I don't know, it doesn't seem in my mind that the White Lotus would completely let this slide, even if this is sort of like a decent sort of outcome. It seems, I don't know, it feels like they're still grabbing for power in some regard here, even if they are, supposed to be this sort of shadowy sort of organization at this point in time. So I don't know. I wonder how that would play out in the end.
So Yang Chen and Kavik leave on their own. What's going to happen here is Yang Chen wants to meditate into the spirit world, but this time with Kavik there to protect her body. So while they're on the way to the spirit oasis, they do discuss stuff of like, Kavik is happy that his brother kind of gets to be with his family because he feels that his brother would have gotten himself killed if he kind of continued on with the kind of crazy errand running stuff. So this is probably for the best how that's worked out. And, again, there's the implication of that, like, yeah, Yang Chen's going to have meetings with Chai-Si at some point eventually to get more of this information. They do address how, yes, Yang Chen has become the Zhongdu of everywhere, basically, the 4 Shang cities. And so this will allow her to fix a lot of the problems with the Shang system because she controls all of them. So she can even out the kind of funding between all of them. And because she effectively controls world trade now, the implication seems to be this is how she can sort of bring the Platinum Affair to an end, is by just managing this so perfectly that it almost evolves the Shang cities into just one thing. And at a certain point, they're not even Shang cities anymore. They're just cities where trade happens to take place. And so if the nations can solve their issues, eventually the Shang cities don't need to exist and can become whatever they become in the future. Taku, we know, remains Taku, but we have no mention of what the other 3 are in the future. So it's an interesting one overall. But then they address, like, you didn't have to come with me. Are you sure you're doing this for the right reason? So once again, Yang Chen is asking the question. If you're only here because you feel you still need to make things up to me or you feel guilty, then we can call this off. But he's like, no, you're annoying. I'm doing this because you deserve it, because I want to be here. And she's like, okay, that's the real you. Fine, I accept this finally. And this is meant to be the real kind of reunion in a way of these two. But we'll have a further one in just a second. But what are your thoughts on this conversation between Yang Chen and Kavik?
Yeah, I thought this was a nice sort of intro to their sort of full reconciliation here. Just sort of understanding sort of that there's this big thing that she still needs to do with the cities here, and that they have this sort of relationship here that's sort of being, pretty much sort of mended here. Like she mentions, sort of that we're even now. You don't really have to do anything else more for me if you really don't want to. And, he's sort of at the point where he's able to just say that this is just something that he wants to do without all the extra sort of stuff. So I like that they're at this sort of even keel sort of point at their sort of relationship again.
From there, we basically get the kind of spirit world stuff of just like they sit down, he's there peacefully. They describe that like they sit like side by side, not facing each other. That's not a requirement here. But this time she goes into the spirit world normally, just her spirit. She doesn't go in like body and soul. So it's more normal this time out. And yeah, we just quickly get the kind of recap here, going through the general area of the fog. She encounters some of the people. Eventually, she finds who she's looking for. But there's a little bit of an interesting setup here. She does find people who seem to be kind of almost surprisingly calm in the situation, when usually everyone she's met has been completely kind of chaotic because of what's going on. So she finds Jetson, and the interesting thing about this is just in a way how calm Jetson is about the whole thing. Jetson has no real reaction almost to seeing Yangchen. It's just kind of like, why are you here? Like, to her, nothing of particular note in a way has happened. But for Yangchen, this has been this thing that has affected her all of these years, like one of her deepest regrets, and not knowing in a way the full details of what's happened. And so Yangchen is just stunned to kind of see her here, and to just see her so calm and in a way at peace. She immediately starts to apologize, but for Jetson it's just like, I saved you all those years ago, that's it was fine. There's nothing to like apologize for. Yangchen asks like, how do I free you? Free me from what? And it's that reveal that like, oh yeah, I'm in the fog of lost souls, but like, I'm not trapped in here really. Like, it doesn't like work on me. I'm so at peace. This doesn't do anything to me. And we actually in fact get the reveal that Jetson is so kind of at peace, has a true mind, that she's actually able to help and kind of calm down others in the fog of lost souls. She can't permanently kind of free them, but she can make it so that it's not such a torturous like experience here. And so it's just this kind of almost like instantaneous kind of situation of all these fears and issues fall away because it's nowhere near as bad as Yangchen thought it was going to be. And it's odd in a way, the way it actually ends up working out. We'll discuss the second part of this in just a minute, but what are your thoughts on just the first couple of interactions between the two after all this time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's definitely not exactly what you expected, because they sort of, led you to believe that, everyone in the fog of lost souls, or, this fog in general, is sort of, at like their lowest point here. Like, they did so bad in the sort of physical realm that, they're here as punishment because they couldn't do it right. And, this sort of affects, Yangchen, because, even if the fog itself isn't sort of messing with her like it is last time, is still, she can see all the problems of the world reflected in these peoples and their problems and their troubles. So, they definitely, play up the act that, you can't be in this area and be okay. Like, it just doesn't work that way. But as we see, Jetson's sort of, calm demeanor, her personality, her sort of, strength of heart and character is such that, she doesn't have an issue here. She's been brought here for sort of the reasons of being able to impart that on other people. And that sort of, is completely the opposite of what Yangchen sort of was expecting here. And, is just sort of in disbelief until the moment she really sort of can grasp the sort of concept here.
And so, yeah, this is the reveal that Jetson is fine staying here to serve this kind of role of easing the pain of the people in the fog of lost souls. And then she kind of points out that, like, oh, I'm sure you're doing basically similar stuff in the human world because you're the Avatar. And this is where like Yangchen has her, typically in one of these books, this would typically be with a past life, a past Avatar connection, that you have this kind of emotional moment. This is the Kiyoshi Yangchen equivalent scene from the Kiyoshi novels. But it's with Jetson this time, which I think makes a lot more sense for this book. And she's like, no, I can't. Like she basically goes in like I'm not a good avatar, you know, I'm on the verge of giving up. I have all these kind of issues, doubts, regrets about, you know, everything I've done. And she says, I keep losing parts of myself. You, New John, I can't hold it together. Nothing, like the world never changes, it never learns. And she just lays all the kind of emotion out there. And so we're kind of waiting for like, okay, what advice does Jetson give her? And it's like, you know, I hated you sometimes, right? And it's like, what? Frequently I hated you. You were a little terror, a nightmare. I used to tell Abbas Dagmola that you'd ruined my life, and I'd drop you off the cliffside when no one was looking. And it's a what? She points out that like taking care of you was exhausting. I never had space. It tore chunks out of me. Because of you, I ended up a different shape than I would have untouched. But I loved you. I loved you more than I hated you. Loved you more than life itself. Believe me when I say that you were always worth it. And then goes on to say that like you're afraid of failing. You're afraid of every possible success that might slip through your fingers, every missed chance. You're so afraid of what the voices will say. Don't be. And basically points out that I can only help the people I can see in the fog, even though there's so many I've never met. The same is kind of true for you. You can only help what's in front of you, what you can actively deal with. And that's what you need to do right now. Your friend needs help. Wake up, and this time it actually works in that way. Yangchen does wake up, and that's where we kind of wrap it up. And I really like this because it's just this idea of, in a way, like Jetson pointing out that, like, at least the comparison that I make is that her talking about the whole idea of like, I hated you at times, but in general, most of the time, I loved you. Is kind of exactly the approach Yangchen needs to have to kind of being the avatar in a way to the world. It's like, yeah, you're allowed to be frustrated, but once you always try, that's enough. And kind of pointing out that like you need to maybe stop over planning so much and accounting for potential mistakes or missed opportunities. Do the best that you can. It's like simple advice, but it's kind of like perfect coming from who it's coming from. So what are your thoughts on this at the end of this conversation we've been waiting for so long?
Yeah, I think it was a nice one. I think it's nice for them to have this sort of sit down here and to sort of, you know, try to give Yang Chen perspective on what she's sort of doing, knowing that, you know, this isn't something that you can, you know, solve so easily. Like you said, she's been such a sort of plan ahead person or an active sort of involvement person in the sort of problems of the world because that's sort of her role. But there's things that you're not going to be able to do even with as much power as you actually have. I think they've played up in earlier sort of chapters here that she has such a command on this power as being the avatar and being able to bend all the elements and to be able to sort of move the earth with like a whim of her mind, right? But even with all that power, there's limits to what she can do. And she thinks that she's been sort of broken so far that she's at the limit of what it is, but she really just needs to sort of understand that there's only going to be so much you can do, like Jetson and sort of helping the people in the fog here, and she had dozens and dozens of people that she's helped, but the fog is a huge place, and even in sort of the infinite lifetime that she's going to say be there for whatever period of time, she's not going to be able to reach everything. And the same thing is going to be for the avatar, which is probably why they're able to be reincarnated and have sort of another chance at doing things. So there's always going to be sort of more work that's going to be needed to be done, and you can only do so much with the resources and the abilities that you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I guess Yang Chen is finally coming across and understanding.
Mm-hmm. And then the final scene of the whole book is obviously Yang Chen wakes back up in the Spirit Oasis, and Kavik is being attacked by the Fog of Lost Souls. So once again, it's sort of like come through here, And what she sees, like, because the idea is that the fog in a way makes you replay the worst moments of your life, your biggest regrets. And what he is going through there is he's constantly saying, like, over and over again, the sunbeam, the ship you're looking for is the sunbeam. So he's replaying his betrayal. He views betraying Yangchen as being the worst moment of his life. She obviously uses the spirit water, frees him from the spirit, sends it back into the spirit world, and they're left kind of on the ground just like discussing kind of what happened here. You know, did you save me? Returning the favor. Did you find your sister? In a way, she'll be fine. And then she does actually tell the truth about, you know, I used you in a ruse in Taku, like, just to be completely honest. Like, you know, you betrayed me, but I kind of betrayed you as well over this situation. I wasn't honest. But in her head throughout this whole thing, she's kind of thinking that she hates that she almost got like the cheat code in a way for forgiving Kavik, that she got to see his true feelings kind of laid out in front of her because of the way the spirit works, where she almost wishes that she could have come around to trust him kind of just naturally on her own. But she has perfect assurance now because of what's happened, but she kind of feels she doesn't deserve it to be this kind of clean. It's kind of turned around where, like, he's done everything on his side to mend this issue. She almost wishes she had a little bit of work to do herself to get to that trust, but it's been solved here. So then we just wrap up with some final things of just like she revealed, I did it to protect Ying Su. And Kavik's immediate response is, oh, is she joining up? Like, is she joining the team? And Yangchen says maybe, she seems to be kind of interested, but I don't know. She then asks Kavik, what are you going to do now? He says he's going to get out of the game. I want to be a healer's assistant. I think I'd like that. And Yangchen's like, I basically gave you a taste for that style of a job, but don't do it because I need you. Stay with me. There's so much to be done and I need you by my side until it's all done. And so Kavik laughs and says, tell you what, I'll sleep on it as the book comes to an end. But it's clear that, you know, Avatar and Companion are back together here. This is where they finally kind of formed this dynamic in the right way rather than weird kind of business kind of dealings being involved in it. This is like true, honest, finally this is official once and for all. And that is where the book ends, with the full forgiveness for the betrayal having happened here. So what are your thoughts here on the ending of the book here?
Yeah, I like this. I think this was, you know, a good way to sort of pull things to a close, to show that they're sort of back to being, you know, sort of Avatar and Companion, and that sort of situation has been resolved, even if it, you know, according to Yang Chen, it's not necessarily like, you know, fully, I guess, sort of natural, but I think, you know, in a way that sort of works for sort of the best there, because she can, you know, really sort of understand, you know, sort of what he's thinking, considering, you know, how sort of skilled he is, or how everyone seems so skilled at sort of deception. So this is sort of like a way to sort of really sort of, you know, understand sort of their viewpoint here. And I don't know, I think it's cool to see that he does have the ability to sort of go back and sort of see his family, or most of his family, considering everything that he's sort of gone through here. So I like this sort of, you know, quick resolution to the relationship here, while still showing that there's still more to be done. Like the city's problems isn't completely sort of resolved, and, you know, there's still the issue with sort of the world leaders that has to be resolved eventually, but there's at least, you know, an apparent path towards, you know, some sort of success.
Mm-hmm. And then I suppose we just have to get into some final thoughts. I suppose first of all, like, is this like a good ending, I suppose, overall? For me, I think from like a character perspective, for like especially Yangchen and Kavik, it is a good point. But I also do feel that I do think the book does kind of rush towards the ending in like the last couple of chapters, that we finished with dealing with the villains, and then it's just like Feishan's scene, and we're doing resolution and all these other plots at the same time as we're doing the main kind of two characters plot dynamics at the same time. And I just wish there was a little bit more time at the end, because it is the ending of a 2-book series, not just one book. I wish there was just a bit more time to breathe, and like, now that the team's fully together, let's see them all interact together. And let's maybe cut ahead to one of those scenes with Chai-Si, because I really feel Chai-Si and Kalyan especially are borderline missing a final scene in the book, because there's so much that feels unresolved with them, to the point where it feels like there's enough setup where there could be a third book, but we know it's a duology. So you kind of wonder, like, why weren't certain things in the book? Certain things that you feel one of these meetings with Chai-Si would immediately kind of resolve and address. That's kind of the way I kind of end the book feeling. Now, I felt similarly with The Shadow of Kyoshi as well, that it also, when it got right to the end, struggled with doing its ending, because they're both weird in that they're ending to 2-book series, but they end on points that there's no true ending of the story, because these characters remain the Avatar for years and years after this point. Both of them have like direct issues at the end of their stories that they still have to go on and do, in the sense that, like, why doesn't this book cut ahead, like, say, 5-10 years, and actually explain to us the resolution of the Shang cities? When are we going to get that? It's just that sort of like, this was your opportunity to tell that story, wasn't it? Where otherwise is it going to come? Because it feels like it's leaving the doors open for maybe stories where, like, I don't know where that's going to be told. The comics haven't shown any sign of telling these type of stories. They don't do novels regularly enough to, I would say, almost like justify like a short story style thing as just a resolution. And it's hard to imagine them randomly going back and like inserting in a third book kind of out of nowhere. So what are your thoughts on the kind of this as the ending of the book, and what it kind of does and doesn't do, given, you know, it's the end of 2 books?
Yeah, I definitely can understand that point of it. Sort of, there's a lot of doors sort of still open, as they even, mention themselves, that this isn't a full sort of resolution of things. But I don't know. I mean, that's sort of the whole thing of Avatar in general, is that the sort of cycle continues. Nothing is completely resolved. Like, the world is still going on. And, the Avatar, as far as we know, is, continually being sort of reborn, and, human problems are still going to be there in the future. So, there's, it almost makes it seem like there's never going to be an end in sight. So from that sort of idea, it doesn't sort of bother me as much, because, that's the whole point of things continuing on in the future. But, it would definitely be nice to sort of get some clarification. I don't know. To me, I don't know if I necessarily need sort of the resolution of Chai-Si and Kailan and sort of their sort of story. I don't know. For me, I think it would be interesting to sort of see sort of the group dynamic, just because it would be nice just to get to see them sort of interact one last time. I do like that sort of idea, especially since, it seemed like, the 4 of the companions are still on like a even level now, but we haven't seen sort of Yangchen sort of interact with the whole sort of group in sort of that sort of situation. So it would have been nice to see sort of if there's, any sort of extra sort of like, okay, we're all good here again, sort of thing. Just because, that is sort of our team Avatar there. So I think that might have been cool to see. And then maybe, something with the sort of world leaders overall, just because we didn't see anything between sort of the fire, the fire or water tribes in terms of, their sort of, perspective on, say, like the convocation hall being completely sort of demolished or anything like that. So those sort of like immediate sort of things, I think it would have been cool if they sort of extended it a bit out, just to sort of give us some sort of idea of where that sort of stands. But it definitely seems like they're trying to sort of imply that these are bigger plot threads, things that can't sort of be sort of quickly sort of resolved. Like, we can't sort of have sort of like an epilogue type thing to say, oh, this and this sort of happened, and, everything is sort of okay-ish at the end. It feels like they're trying to say that it's going to keep going. I don't know. Maybe if they did actually do sort of like a trilogy then there would have been enough time to sort of have a sort of proper resolution of things without sort of, tacking on extra sort of stories or anything like that. So I don't know. I don't think it sort of bothers me quite as much, but there are some things that I would have liked them to sort of, just sort of, tell us how things would continue in the future.
Yeah, because the few kind of, I think, comments about the book I've seen in terms of like reviews from maybe your average fan, not quite maybe full on hardcore fan, I think it's definitely the sense that, wait, the plot of this book was about ultimately like Platinum Affair and Shang cities, and the way the book ends is with a vague idea that with Yangchen in control of them all, that will solve things going forward. But it's clear there's not a third book, even though the implication would be that, oh, third book to wrap it up and see what actually happens here. But it is more of a, like, during Yangchen's era type thing. Resolving the Shang City situation is one of the things that she goes on to solve. Like, I think the Kyoshi novels refer to the idea that she forms all of these like treaties and stuff like that, including stuff like between the Fifth Nation. I think they mention it. So that's where I think that the book doesn't really know what it wants to do when it does its like endings. In that, like, this is an ending to the Yangchen era for now. When do we come back? Is the idea, like, and where do we come back also? And this is where, like, because Avatar Studios hasn't fully explained to us what the plan is really, it's frustrating when you get to these points and it's like, when's the next Kyoshi content coming? Because it's now been a bunch of years since that, and people want to know what happens next. And because there's so much of Kyoshi's life that we don't know about. And now it's the same with Yangchen, but almost more directly with this book, because there's so many open plot threads, you want a direct sequel. And I think that's kind of some of my feelings about this book, getting into more kind of like final thoughts on the book overall, is that I think it's probably some of the best stuff that we've seen in the novels in terms of characterization, in terms of like, I think it was a really strong move to have the kind of double main character dynamic with Yangchen and Kavik both getting a lot of screen time, rather than like in the first book, like Rangi gets nowhere near as much screen time as Kyoshi gets. And you notice it because Kavik, I think, is a much stronger developed character by the end of these two books. And that's really, really strong. I think a lot of the political elements with the introduction of like Shang cities, Yangchen's kind of arc as the Avatar, Kavik's like issue with his brother and trying to kind of do the right thing. That's all like fantastic and is some of the best stuff in the novels. But I'd also say that I think we get some of the worst stuff in the novels when it comes to, I think, the way they went about doing reveals. Like I really do think, and I've had months to reflect on this now, that I feel it's borderline kind of unforgivable that the book just doesn't attempt to explain how Chai-Si knows about combustion, to why she sets this thing up in the first place. Like, I think it's getting into like kind of borderline plot hole territory, or just the reasons you have for why you didn't explain it. I'd love to know what they are, because it feels like I'm missing just this clear, super important chunk of the story, and it really feels like there's like a cut chapter somewhere in here that I don't know why it was done in this way. On the more technical side of combustion bending, I wish we had gotten a little bit more maybe about what the second stage is actually about, more of the specifics on how it's learned and how it even came about in the first place. But I don't mind that as much as I just want to know why Chai-Si, like our main villain, even knew to do this in the first place. I think it would have helped her arc to have that kind of be there. And then I do think, on a similar note, I don't like how ill-defined the Kalyan Chai-Si relationship is, where it's very unclear to me by the end, like, what the dynamic is in terms of, like, who loves who. Is there a connection on both sides? The implication would be that there is, at least to a certain extent, so they're kind of both kind of weaknesses for each other, but it almost feels like it's, again, missing from the book that they never told you how this happened. Especially because of how much kind of confusion the whole, well, he actually did betray her while she was pregnant, so while they were in a relationship, for his former friend, and then he got away with it. There's weirdness about it that I think it's just like, I don't know why you didn't come back to it. There's some things where I feel like it's just, you can't just not explain what this is, and it gets into kind of plot hole territory. But I still think it's 4 out of 4 for the Avatar novels. Like, they're all 4 of them, I think, are very, very good. But I think going into this book, I felt this could have been the best of the novels, and I can't say that it is by the end of it overall. But what are your final thoughts on Legacy of Yangchen?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall for me, it works pretty well in terms of, giving me sort of the Avatar sort of story in a more sort of literary format that has a bit more sort of, I guess you could say, intrigue and maturity in terms of, how they're telling the stories, the way that they're describing the actions, sort of the political ramifications of sort of the world and how they're sort of letting these events, unfold around Yangchen and sort of her companions, and sort of, showing that this is, one of the larger conflicts that she had to dealt with that eventually does sort of get resolved in some sort of way. I think, it would be nice to sort of have sort of the idea of how this sort of is resolved just from, just wanting to know sort of the full sort of story beat here. And, there's definitely a lot of sort of intriguing elements like sort of the combustion bending that, it would be cool to have more technicals on it, but I don't know if that's always sort of so necessary. I think, like you were mentioning, I think it would have been cool to get sort of more backstory on Chai-Si and sort of her sort of, idea of this sort of technique, and sort of the, idea of the whole sort of island and sort of its workings would have been cool to sort of find out and sort of understand a bit sort of more. I don't know if for me it feels sort of as sort of plot holy, but I think it would have definitely helped flesh out her character in general. I mean, we do get a little bit of her backstory, and we understand that, she has been sort of, pushed to these own limits herself in terms of being able to do things. So there's like the beginnings of what her sort of understanding of these sort of techniques and understanding, airbending culture and how that sort of plays into it without us getting quite enough to really sort of piece it together on our own. I think maybe a little bit more would have been helpful in that sort of regard there, but I still like the stories. I think they're cool. I enjoyed sort of reading them. The audiobook versions of them is also really good as well. So there's just a lot to be had from it if you're looking for another, Avatar story to read.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think the main thing is just like, but both duologies are really strong. Like, I think now that we've had a few months since the second book came out, I do think there's a sense of underappreciation for like the Yang Chen stuff. I still think people lean more towards the Kyoshi stuff, which I think is fine, but I think it's maybe a little bit at the expense of like Yang Chen's arc is really, really good. Like, I think it's really well written. Kavik's a great character, and I'm maybe not seeing maybe as much appreciation. It's definitely out there from people who really are into the novels, but I wish there was a bit more Kavik appreciation. Who knows? Like, maybe it will take a generations if it ever gets around to showing more visuals from this stuff to get to that point. But it's 4 books, and I'm again super excited for the 5th. Like, I'd love it if they announced it at New York Comic Con, but we don't know what the situation is, as with many things in Avatar. But hopefully we get some details soon. But that's been the podcast. Obviously, going forward, of course, we'll do a podcast to cover if anything happens at New York Comic Con. We'll have the review for Azula in the Spirit Temple. That will likely be the next podcast. And then we'll get back around to the Avatar and Korra rewatches as we, I suppose, get more towards the end of the year at that point. But it's been episode 264 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.